first of all, help yourself to snacks and bottled water if you want. It's there the whole time. I'm Jana Lee with the Professional Training Institute, director here at Family Service Society. We're so glad you could come to our buildings. Make sure you get an evaluation, and if you need CE, make sure you pick up that form. It's a little file cabinet back there if you haven't gotten it. And so I'd like to welcome Dan Cohen. I've known Dan and Andrea for 2.5 decades.
Yeah.
So, he used to work for our agency, but not this one. It was the old one that used to be where the alternative school is. So we go way back. Of course, Andrea and Dan have attended our trainings over the years, and Dan approached me about doing a training, and I said yes. Let's do this. Let's do this. So kind of his inaugural one. So we're happy to have you in. And let's get on to the important stuff. Welcome, Dan.
Hi, everybody. I'm Dan Cohen. I'm the one who will be talking today. As Jana Lee said, this is the first time I've done this. This may be the last time I do it. I may continue to do it. I haven't decided yet. We are being recorded today. Please wave at the camera. Say hi. It is being recorded today. I'm going to be going back over the recording later to see things that seem to work or things that didn't work, and I'm going to try to evolve this talk to see if I want to do it again or not. I might not. I haven't decided. A year and a half ago, Andrea and I know a lot of you here, but not everybody. In the pink is my wife, Andrea. Andrea and I were in a severe car accident about a year and a half ago, and I'll be talking a lot about that today, what happened, the results of that, short-term, long-term. But I've been thinking about it ever since. It has affected me deeply. I have a strong and obvious case of PTSD now, and it's been a very interesting experience going through that as a victim of an accident, and as a therapist, because as a therapist I can take a step back and sort of observe what's going on with me and think about, oh yeah, I know about that theory, I know about that kind of thing, and sometimes it was very useful to do that, and sometimes it was like, well, that was bull, that didn't make any sense at all in my situation. I am going to be doing something a little different today. The training is going to be more of a case study. Originally, I talked about it as overlaying trauma theory with what happened to me. But the more I thought about it, really what I'm talking about is what happened to me, and I'm overlaying trauma theory over that. Because as I was going through this, we didn't have a lot of a roadmap. We have had a lot of people that helped along the way, but we didn't have a lot of a roadmap. I'm a very practical guy in my personal and professional life. If it works, I do it. If it doesn't work, I forget about it. So I'm going to be talking about what worked for me, and I'll be overlaying that with theory. I'm along the way. If you have any needs, you have to take a phone call, you have a text, you get bored, just please go ahead. This is informal today. You're not going to hurt my feelings if you have to step out and take a call. I'm not going to feel put off if you have to do a text. Everybody here has a job and has things that are going on that they have to attend to. I know that because I've done the same thing at trainings. I sit there, oh my God, and it's perfectly okay. Please go ahead and do it. So, where was I going? I have notes. I have notes. Anyway, as I said, the dual experience of going through this as a person and as a therapist has been very interesting. And my hope with today is not just to talk about my experience, it's to talk about this accident from a couple different perspectives. Our older daughter is here. She's going to talk today about everything from her perspective, because Amanda and her sister have their own story about all about recovery, you'll hear more and more about them and what they went through. You will also hear from the social worker, Carrie, over here in purple, who kept me sane during the first 9 weeks of hospitalization. Carrie came to see me virtually every day. I will say very publicly, as my social worker therapist, you can say anything you want. Anything you want. There's no secrets. I'll sign any release. You can talk about anything. I don't care. My current therapist, Sandy Follett, is back here in the blue. Same thing. There's no secrets. You don't have to say anything, but if you do say something, don't feel bad about it. Everything is on the table. Nothing I have said is off the table. Okay? So my hope is that everything we talk about today will be useful to you. Andrea does not remember any of this. Oftentimes people come to me and say, and ask me questions about it. Is Andrea driving? Does she have any problems in cars? What does she think of all this? Andrea remembers the day before the accident and then basically woke up 2 months later. And I'll talk about that process, but Andrea's brain wouldn't lay down any memories for 2 months. So Andrea has no recollection of any of this. She may be hearing some of these stories for the first time today. So I will add, this is probably only the second time I've seen Carrie without a mask. She had to wear a mask in the hospital, and I saw her once without a mask after being released. But I was literally worried to death, like, oh my God, what if Carrie comes in and I don't recognize her? All I remember is the mask, you know. So if you have any questions, please feel free to ask them at any time. No question is going to be too personal. Trust me, we have had no privacy for the last year and a half. No question is too personal. I reserve the right to say, I'll talk about that privately, but not publicly. But there is very little I want to talk about publicly. Okay? So please do not feel bad about asking any questions along the way, if you have any. The last thing I would like to do is I'd like you to look around the room, find somebody you don't know, introduce yourself, and say who you are and why you're here. Now, yes.
Get away from the table because I am my boyfriend. So we're here with the Family Service Society. I am the social worker at Hugh Gregg Elementary, which is down the street, down Dodge Avenue. So I'm a student.
If I just couldn't stay here, like, I would just have that small town. I'd never
Everyone else set? Everyone meet something? Has everyone met somebody new? Good. It's so boring to go to trainings and not get to talk to other people. You know. One of the things I'm going to try to talk about today, or a subplot in all of this, is I think one of the things that we do incorrectly in therapy sometimes, out of being well intentioned, is we foster dependence rather than independence. One of the things I've found very helpful is figuring out ways to take care of my head on my own, and everybody has played a role in that. But when it comes right down to it, you can't see a therapist forever. And oftentimes people are only in your life a very short period of time. That's not to say they can't have a very powerful influence. As as helping professionals, there's a lot that you do. Carrie, some days, didn't talk to me for longer than 3 or 4 minutes. I will never forget those conversations. They were so meaningful to me. So never overestimate or underestimate your power as a helping professional. I've said that to myself for years. I've also found it very much to be true. Slide 2, there's only 972. Ernest Hemingway wrote a Farewell to Arms. I think it's fiction, but it is mostly inspired by his experiences during World War I. Ernest Hemingway was a man's man. He was every male aspires to in terms of being tough. He wrote the ending to Farewell to Arms 39 times. He claims 39 times. A historian has suggested that he has found that he actually wrote about 47 different endings. I found this quote fascinating. The world breaks everyone, and afterwards many are strong at the broken places. Okay, that's powerful, but how many times have we heard some version of that? But then he wrote, those that will not break, it kills. And I have been thinking about that ever since I found this quote. What could that possibly mean? Those who will not break, it kills. What does that mean? And I've spent a lot of time talking about that, reflecting on that. We spend a lot of time talking about resiliency, and I spend a lot of time talking about it in terms of being strong. How can I bounce back from this? How can I do this? How can I do that? My experience of PTSD is it broke me. 100%. And I couldn't help it. It destroyed me. Absolutely. All that strength out the window. So what does this mean? Sometimes it means you have to be broken to come back together. Because I was and still am broken in so many ways. But I had to be. I had to be broken to make sense of everything, because only by coming apart could I start to come back together. By the way, I'm sorry, I was not expecting to get emotional. I might do it again. Please ignore me. Please ignore me. It'll pass in a second. So anyway, I find that quote fascinating. I love it. Okay, slide 3. Only 969 to go. Our goals for the day. I'm going to discuss a case of trauma and PTSD from beginning to end. I am going to walk you through this on a very granular level in terms of what happens to me. It is going to be a true case study. Hopefully it won't bore you too much. We're not going to get down the weeds too bad, but I am going to be talking about some very personal things today and some very personal reactions. That's okay with me. I've talked with lots of people about this. So I'm going to overlay a theory of trauma treatment to my experiences. Let's see, Dr. Bessel van der Kolk wrote the book, Body Keeps the Score, one of the premier books on trauma and overcoming trauma. And I love his theories. I love his theories from what I have learned. I have a secret for you. I haven't read all of the book. Amanda bought it for me shortly after I was released from the hospital.
Wait,
I tried.
I bought the book and I said, you read it.
Yes.
Tell me about it.
The truth is it is a dense book. It's also, frankly, an upsetting book. And I found it very difficult. And frankly, I was kind of ashamed of that and wasn't going to say anything about it. But in one of Dr. Bessel van der Kolk's videos, might be one that I showed today. No, in a podcast, he says that not a lot of people who have gone through trauma actually read through the entire book. They can't do it. And I'm like, oh, okay, I'm normal then. So I felt better at that point. Hopefully, my experience will inspire your practice in some way, shape, or form. I'm not talking about just, okay, come to my office and sit down and we'll spend 42 minutes talking about this and then I'll do my notes. I'm talking about helping professionals from all different angles, all different places, some short-term, some long-term, some having a very specific role, some having a very general role. Hopefully whatever you do, what I talk about today, will help you in some way to think about your practice. Okay. Any questions so far? Introduction. I'm going to talk about who I am. I'm going to walk you through a little bit of my history. I'm going to talk about who I am. It'll help you to understand a little of why I had the reactions I did and why I was able to recover in the ways that I do. I'm going to talk about the development of my symptoms. I'm going to talk about the accident, how I responded to it, how I developed symptoms, what those symptoms were, how long they lasted. I'm going to talk about things that helped. I'm going to talk about things that helped along the way. Recovery is a long process, has been a long process for me. I'm going to loop through the history 3 times. The first time, I'm going to talk about all the bad stuff, and I'm going to talk about the course of treatment and getting better physically and symptoms. Then I'm going to talk about recovery. I'm going to talk about implications to you. We'll have a discussion afterwards and then a short epilogue, a very short epilogue, 2 slides, I promise. That's slide 971 and 972. Okay? At this rate, we're going to be here till tomorrow. Hope you don't mind. Okay. Okay. Who am I? To understand trauma, I think you have to understand the person. So I'm going to let you into my life, and I'm going to tell you a little about me. Everything that I talk about today is part of the picture. There are certainly parts of my life I am not going to talk about today because they have no relevance. But everything that I talk about today plays a role in either what made things worse for me or what makes things better for me. Okay? Everything is part of the picture. I've been a social worker for over 30 years. I graduated with my degree in social work and was licensed. I was licensed, I think, in '94, but I had my degree since '93. I started out doing substance abuse treatment for almost 10 years. I worked in detoxes, inpatients, outpatients. I worked directly with clients. I worked with families. I ran a family program for a while. I did several years in county mental health. I loved county mental health. Some people don't like county work. I loved it. I love crazy people. I really found a population that I appreciated and enjoyed, despite all of the difficulties between the client's struggles and the struggles with bureaucracy, and things are difficult with counties, and state, and federal stuff. There's a lot of layers to it. And despite all of those challenges, I really liked county work. I did forensic work. I spent time in jails working with inmates on their way in or on their way out, usually on their way in. I was doing mental health evaluations primarily for folks coming into jails. And I've had employee assistance roles over the years. I originally wanted to be an occupational social worker. When I graduated, it was a big thing to have social workers embedded into large employers, and that's been outsourced more and more as the years have gone on. But that was what I originally wanted to do. I did 16 years in private practice part-time. I worked here part-time for a while. That's anywhere between 4 and maybe 12 sessions a week. I eventually got out of it. I loved the clients. I hated the business. It's a tough business, and I just wanted to sit around and talk to people and help people all day, and I kind of burnt out on the business side of it. Some people respond to it very well. I think if I started 10 years later, I would love the online virtual stuff, but I think I'm too late for it. I don't have that stamina for it anymore. The last 18 years, I've worked for the Corning Painted Post School District in a variety of roles. I've spent at least 12 of those, maybe 13 or 14, at the Severn Elementary School as their primary general social worker. I love it. I wasn't sure I would like the little Rugrats, to be honest with you. I liked my kids when they were young. I'm not sure I liked kids in general. And so when I went to the elementary school, I wasn't sure I was gonna dig it. I love them. God, they're fun. I often say that the little kids have the same problems as the big kids. They're just more likely to be honest about it. Only because they don't know any better. So I love it. I serve on a few committees and in a few ways for the district. I serve on the school emergency management team. That's a school-based emergency management team. I also work on their threat assessment team. And believe it or not, we do have kids that threaten to hurt others or hurt themselves on a regular basis. I'm a member of that. I'm on the district-wide safety committee where we talk about more global issues in regards to safety and threats and security. I'm also a member of the post-incident response team. So if something bad happens at a school or happens to a student or a staff member, which does happen, we are a big district, you're just bound to have a few people have something bad happen every year. I'm on that team, as are several other people here. Okay. I am currently certified in CISM and CISD, that's the Mitchell model, for critical incident stress management and stress debriefing. I have several certifications in sort of basic trauma first aid, CPR, stop the bleed. I also have a certification in advanced bleeding control. I've done a lot of training in safety and security issues on my own and with the school district. I'm going to be very honest with you. I love shooting. I love shooting. I've done a lot of firearms training as well and spent a lot of time with folks involved in safety and security issues in one goal or another. With that, I've learned a great deal about trauma response, because that's a big deal in those communities. What does that mean? Oh, I got one. I am a trainer in student threat assessment, so I can train people. I'm certified to train people in how to assess situations. I'm also a trainer in civilian response to active shooters. So if I can go to workplaces or churches or groups or whatever it is, if you want to talk about best practices of what to do if a threat comes into a church or a business or something like that, I can talk about what to do as a civilian. I'm formerly certified in disaster mental health response. I was certified to train that at one point. I'm formerly trained, I'm not now. I can't do therapeutic crisis intervention anymore because there are physical interventions involved with that. I can no longer do those because of my injuries, but I used to be a trainer in how to assist kids who were being violent and dangerous, and to not injure them or yourself along the way. And inmate suicide prevention, I was certified to train that at one point. I am not an expert in trauma and PTSD at all. I have experience in treating complex trauma and PTSD. My work and personal interests have provided me a lot of opportunity to be inoculated to stress and crisis situations. A lot of opportunity to that. Didn't help me at all. Didn't help me at all. All my knowledge, all my insight, all of that didn't help me one iota. I developed these symptoms honestly, and not much protected me from them. I was able to sort of observe the process as an outsider, but my experience was I was not protected. I was not protected and not prepared. Okay. I had a normal, stable, and loving childhood. I was raised in an intact family. My father was an attorney, my mother a homemaker. I have one younger sister. No family's perfect. I'm more than happy to drag my parents through the mud privately. But I had a good upbringing without major traumas or incidents. Certainly there were things that went wrong, but I think the important part is knowing that it was pretty good. I grew up on a farm. My parents were very much, I think, wannabe hippies. You know, we had a farm. canned things. I grew up with horses and the occasional cow. They would raise a cow some years to be slaughtered. My mom always knew if she looked the cow in the eye, she wouldn't be able to have it slaughtered later. So she would back up to the stall with the food, throw the food over her and walk away. I'm not making that up. She actually did it. And we had horses. I grew up riding horses. And I didn't quite understand the importance of that at the time. I stopped riding horses around 13 when I got interested in girls. Well, guess what? Girls that are 13 and up tend to be interested in horses at exactly the wrong time. So I'm not terribly smart. I was raised by a non-practicing Jew and a non-practicing Presbyterian. That's going to pop up from time to time. In that I was raised in a dual religious household. I'll talk a little more about how that has allowed me spiritual flexibility over the years. Last, I've got a history of some strong family members that I think about a lot. My grandfather on my mother's side owned a specialty manufacturing plant that made things during World War II for the war effort. He made parts for something called the Norden bomb site, which if you look it up was important during World War II. He had what was called Q clearance at the time, which is the equivalent of top secret clearance now. He would go to the Pentagon and talk with people about what they needed. Very interesting and important part of my history was following him. My father's side of the family, equally strong and fascinating. It was his side of the family that was Jewish. My great-grandmother and great-grandfather immigrated from Poland. He came from Poland, she came from Russia around the early 1900s, prior to World War II by about 1 decade. But my great-grandmother came to the U.S. at 13 years old. She spent 2 weeks on a ship by herself, not speaking any English. Her father, who I believe, if I'm understanding the history correctly, was a Jewish dissident in Russia. And the Tsar said, I'm going to kill all of you because I don't like Jews and I don't like what you're saying. So he put all of his kids on boats. And they came to the U.S. I have relatives apparently down in Mexico. I don't know if you follow this kind of thing, but in Mexico there's actually a large Jewish population. I believe Mexico City has their first Jewish female mayor who was just voted in. Also, my great-grandmother and great-grandfather, I love this story, lived in Long Island, and they started one of the first farm stands there. And another interesting part of the history, you don't normally think of Jews as farmers, but my family grew up farming, and I grew up thinking about vegetables and flowers and that kind of thing. Their neighbors found out they were Jewish. They didn't want any Jews in their neighborhood. So one day there's a knock on the door, and one of the neighbors is there, or maybe a group of neighbors, I'm not sure, and they said, you know something, we don't want you here. We don't want you here because you're Jewish. We don't want you here so much that we have gone around and we have collected money. We will give you this amount of money, I think it was like $11,000 or $13,000, if you will leave and move. I'm sure they were thinking, well, they're Jewish, of course they will take the money. It's the equivalent of, depending on which algorithm you use, could be as much as about $150,000 today. Imagine going to your neighbors and saying, I don't want the Smiths there anymore. You know, can I get $5,000 from you for the pool to bribe them to leave? You know, that kind of thing. My great-grandmother and great-grandfather said, screw you, and stayed, and stayed. That's the kind of stock I'm from. And I'm very proud of that, and I think a lot about them. Okay, my personal interests. I have years of on again and off again working out, weightlifting. I was a swimmer in high school. I swam on the masters team at the YMCA for a while after we moved here. Masters, you know, the men's masters team is a nice way of saying fat old man's team. So I swam with them. Around 20 years ago, Andrea and I, who always tended towards being larger, just decided we wanted to lose some weight. And I lost 75 pounds at the time. I think Andrea lost 45. That was 20 odd years ago. I've gained about half of it back since then, but that still was something we did. That was it's something we're proud of and important to us. I have a lot of interest in physical challenges. I've done about 50 different ones over the years. Some of them were tactical training, I'll be honest with you. Others of those were 5Ks. I've done 5Ks, I've done half marathons, I've done full marathons. I've done one sprint triathlon. Twice I've done 50-mile rucks that are timed. You have 20 hours to go 50 miles. My point in saying that is not to brag, but that, I gotta tell you, that hurt. They were miserable. They were awful. They were absolutely awful. What's important about that is that in doing that, I learned how to accept something that's hard, how to do something that's hard, and not stop doing something that's hard. I have done some MMA and some grappling. By the way, I was the world's worst fighter. I was terrible. But I loved it. I absolutely loved it. I'm a failed musician. I wanted to be a professional musician. I'm just not good enough. And I enjoy reading, traveling, and being with family. There is nothing more important in my life than my family. I have 2 adult daughters. I have Amanda, who is 25. Andrea and I have a younger daughter, Danielle, who couldn't be here today. She is 23. Amanda works in speech therapy and pathology at Upstate Medical Center. Our younger daughter is in law school in Buffalo right now. Andrea and I have been married 27 years. We've been together more than 30. Nothing is more important to me than family. And the truth is I think family is a lot of the reason why we are where we are today. We did this. This was very much a family experience and a family affair. It's not like it happened to one of us. It literally happened in some way to all of us. And our response as a family was to dial in and get real close and start working together. Amanda and her sister are very different, and they're not afraid to talk loudly about how they're very different. But they worked together during the first several months of this in a beautiful, beautiful way. They're very close as sisters. They're just not afraid to brawl it out when they need to. So that was wonderful. I will tell you, as I said, I have 2 therapists today. Amanda and Danielle both bugged me for months to get into treatment for my PTSD. They knew I was struggling. And finally, after a couple months of bugging me, it's one thing if I want to be an idiot and not do anything about it. It's fully another thing if I'm causing anxiety to my family. I'm not willing to do that. So I got into treatment at that time. Okay. Takeaways. Why is this important? Why do I want to talk about myself? As a kid, I rode horses. Guess what happened when I fell off the horse? Do you think my parents said, "Oh, that's terrible, honey, let's go to the house and have some coffee"? No! They said, "Get your butt up and get back on the horse." It was terrifying. I hate my parents to this day for making me do that, but they were right. Putting me back on a horse after I fell off. And let me tell you, when you're 8 years old and you're 8 feet in the air, that's a long fall. And that hurts, and that's scary. But they said every single time I fell off a horse, which was often, I had to get back up and get on that horse at least for a minute. Because they knew if I didn't do that, I would be scared of horses. And to this day, I am not scared of horses. So the physical challenges, as I said, has taught me a lot of discipline. I have a dual religious background that'll become important in some ways later. I highly value and husband and father. Okay. Also a takeaway, in thinking about this, are you thinking about what strengths your clients bring to the table? Carrie and folks in the hospital, and a lot of you in your roles see people at their worst. And when people are at their worst, you're only seeing some of the worst things that have happened to them and when they are least able to respond in a positive way. So it's very easy to get stuck with those things. And even if it's not the major topic of your conversation, are you thinking about where their strengths are, at least in the back of your head? Because as I've gone through, there are pieces in my background that were very useful in my recovery. How do we access them? How will you help clients remember and access their strengths? As I said, your goal is to foster independence, not dependence. Okay. I'll show you a few photos. The graceful lady on the left, jumping over the fire, is Andrea. The, oh my God, the guy on the right, I think that's me. Yeah, I'm sorry. I just put this up to show you some of what Andrea and I used to do. I've obviously 2 different Spartan races. It's a lot of fun. Here's some pictures of our family over the years. I'm going to start from right and go left for a second. There's the 4 of us. I think that's probably 2021 as a family, and over on Center Way. On the one next to it, it's Amanda's holding a sloth, actually. So that's Andrea and I in Italy a couple years ago. And that is about a month before the accident. Andrea and I drove up to Saratoga Springs. One of the things I'm going to be talking about is grief and loss, and coping with that over the years. Andrea and I, like a lot of people, had devoted our life to raising our kids and launching them. And we were finally at a point a couple of years ago, I was 21 and 23 at the time, when we were feeling like our daughters were fairly successfully launched. And that was a wonderful time for them. We were very happy for them. It was also a time for us to start I think reconnecting is a nice word. We were spending our weekends traveling, usually taking day trips, once or twice a month and doing things. Here we were in Saratoga Springs. Andrea's the one who wanted to do the ropes course, by the way. I am literally terrified of heights. It is a true phobia of mine. And Andrea's like, let's do a ropes course where you're 50 feet in the air and, you're high. So that was a lot of fun that day. I just wanted to show you guys some of these pictures. We didn't know at the time how perfect our life was. We just did not know how perfect it was and how imperfect it could be, how much it could change and how fast. So, looking back on these pictures, they are wonderful memories, but it is also a very different time in our life. So, trauma and PTSD. Okay, let's start with this video real quickly. We're going to move into this. This is Bessel van der Kolk.
The most important thing to know is that there's a difference between trauma and stress. As I like to say to people, life sucks a good amount of the time. We all have jobs and situations that are really unpleasant. But the moment that the situation is over, it's over. The problem with trauma is that when it's over, your body continues to relive it. My name is Bessel van der Kolk. I'm a psychiatrist, neuroscientist, and author of the book, The Body Keeps the Score. I got interested in trauma on my first day working at the Veterans Administration. 1978 was the year, and the Vietnam War was over by about 6 or 7 years. The very first day that I met Vietnam veterans, I was just blown away. These were guys who were my age, who were clearly smart and competent and athletic. And they clearly were just a shadow of their former self. Their bodies were clearly affected by trauma, and they had a very hard time connecting with new people after the war. Around that time, a group of us started to define what trauma is, and in the definition of PTSD, we write, these people have been exposed to an extraordinary event that's outside of normal human experience. In retrospect, that shows us how ignorant and narrow-minded we were, because it turned out that this is not an unusual experience at all. People usually think about the military when they talk about trauma, but at least 1 out of 8 kids in America witness physical violence between their parents. A larger number of kids get beaten very hard by their own caregivers. A very large number of people in general, but women in particular, have sexual experiences that were clearly unwanted and that left them confused and enraged. So, unlike what we first thought, trauma is actually extremely common. There's a lot of debate of what a trauma is to this day. But basically, trauma is something that happens to you that makes you so upset that it overwhelms you. There is nothing you can do to stave off the inevitable. You basically collapse in a state of confusion, maybe rage, because you are unable to function in the face of this particular threat. But the trauma is not the event that happens, the trauma is how you respond to it. One of the largest mitigating factors against getting traumatized is who is there for you at that particular time. When, as a kid, you get bitten by a dog, it's really very scary and very nasty. But if your parents pick you up and say, oh, I see that you're really in bad shape, let me help you. That dog bite doesn't become a big issue because the foundation of your safety has not been destroyed. We are profoundly interdependent people, and as long as our relationships are intact, by and large we're pretty good with trauma. It's a subjective experience, and what may be traumatic for you may not be traumatic for me, depending on our personality and our prior experiences. The problem with trauma is that it starts off with something that happens to us, but that's not where it stops, because it changes your brain. Much of the imprint of trauma is in a very primitive survival part of your brain that I like to call the cockroach brain. There's a part of you that just picks up what's dangerous and what's safe, and when you're traumatized, that little part of your brain, which is usually very quiet, continues to just send messages. I'm in danger. I'm not safe. That event itself is over, but you continue to react to things as if you're in danger. We're talking about survival. We're talking about staying alive. And so some people go into fight flight, or on a more primitive level, people's brain shuts down and they collapse. You have these automatic responses that are not a product of your cognitive assessment, they're a product of your animal brain trying to stay alive in the face of something that part of your brain interprets as a life threat. And the problem then becomes that you are not able to engage, or to learn, or to see other people's point of view, or to coordinate your feelings with your thinking. Traumatized people have a tremendous problem experiencing pleasure and joy. But the core issue is our hormones and our physiological impulses that have to do with survival. Your body keeps mobilizing itself to fight. You have all kinds of immunological abnormalities, endocrine abnormalities, and that really devastates your physical health also. Oftentimes the physical problems are longer lasting than the mental problems. And the other thing that is terribly important is the impact of poverty, or the impact of racism, or the impact of unemployment. There's other societies that are much more trauma savvy than we are, where there is not an enormous amount of income inequality. Healthcare is universal, childcare is universal. A culture like that really looks at what are the antecedents for certain forms of pathology. So the big issue is a political issue. How do we rearrange a society to really know about trauma so that people who grow up under extreme adverse conditions can become full-fledged members of society? The sense of community and people being there for each other is a critical part of surviving and thriving.
Get smarter faster with new videos every week from the world's biggest thinkers.
Give me a second
Bottom left corner.
The most
here.
important thing to
There we go. Okay. Okay, takeaway concepts. Trauma is common. It's not a problem to be fixed, it's a problem to be understood. It is both a psychological and physiological response involving psychological triggers and precognitive physical reactions. When I talk about my symptoms later, I was having reactions that I had no control over. I couldn't outthink them because they were happening in a different part of my brain. My cognition was not enough to fix things. Healing occurs when treatment involves a multimodal set of therapies. I want to comment real briefly on what he was talking about at the end. He was talking about folks who have different gaps in their life. I'm very aware that we are very lucky. Andrea and I are smart. We both work. We got wonderful medical care. Our employer was very supportive. We have phenomenal health insurance. We have a supportive family. I was able to keep my job despite taking a long period of time off. It was so difficult for us. I can't imagine how folks do it otherwise. I think about that a lot. If it was this hard for me, and I am lucky to have all of these things in my life, what happens to the family that sort of doesn't have a supportive family or has other things in the way? I talked to a friend of mine who hadn't realized this. His wife was in a bad car accident and was out of work for a couple of months. She lost her job because she couldn't work, and they were like, well, I need somebody to work, and it's not you, so bye. And I understand it from an employer's perspective, but I also think about how did they survive that? How is that difficult? How difficult is that? That's such an added stress at a time when you're already down. I think about those things a lot. Okay. I liked that video about trauma. It has a good way of explaining things, I think. Let's talk a little about setting events for me. Actually, let me stop for a second. It is close to 2 o'clock. It is 1:50. Folks want a fast break. Does anybody need a break? Okay. Carrie needs a break. So, okay. How about we take a 5-minute break? The next couple stories.
That's talent. You, that's no, that's just talent. You have to.
Yes, you do.
have to.
If you have the option.
Yeah, I can't sit too. Thanks, everybody.
I'm gonna get started.
Like, do this, like,
I'm gonna start at the
Don't get
beginning.
one.
yeah, that's what
Talking about.
I had the same question.
no, that's.
But before that, I'm gonna talk about what I'm calling setting events. I'm gonna talk about setting events later in terms of things that set up recovery for me, but right now I'm gonna talk about setting events that help to explain a little why I had the problems that I did. I'm gonna have to look at this list. So when I was doing this, I was setting all of this up, I started thinking about, okay, what kinds of things made me susceptible to having trouble with this, this kind of trauma? I'm a therapist. I do medical things. I spent a lot of time dealing with very stressful situations, purposely keeping my heart rate low, my brain working, all of that kind of stuff. Why did I have so much difficulty with this? And I started doing this slide and started thinking, well, geez, it's no wonder I had such a mess, and I was such a mess, because I was crushed. I had the normal concerns that everybody has about severe injury and death. Everybody's afraid of injury, everyone's afraid of pain, everyone's afraid of death. And like everybody else, I'm afraid of the same things to the same extent. But that didn't explain everything. Second one, familial avoidance and protectiveness around topics of trauma and death. My family was really weird about trauma and about death, sort of death especially. My father literally wouldn't let my sister and I go to the funerals for his parents. He didn't want to deal with it himself, and he certainly didn't want to try to deal with us. My father does not deal with death well, and just prefers to pretend it doesn't happen. So, boom. My mom would literally freak out anytime there was a phone call after about 9 or 9:30, because the working assumption was a late phone call meant something very bad had happened. So we learned, my sister and I learned from a very young age, you don't talk about this stuff. You don't talk about this stuff because you are protecting mom and dad. You are protecting your family because you are just going to upset them if you bring it up. Where that left us is in a little bit of a deficit because we weren't used to talking. We still aren't used to talking about it. But there were other things as well. Amanda was born 9 weeks early by emergency C-section. She spent 5 weeks in the neonatal ICU. By the way, my family is a train wreck. We are just, I think about the medical things we've had over the years, and I'm like, we are cursed. We are absolutely cursed. Her sister's graduation, oh my Lord, Ellie is, I know, Amanda had just nearly broken her ankle rock climbing, so she had a big boot on her. Andrea's in a wheelchair. I'm hobbling around, thanking God I have the wheelchair to hold on to because my leg hurts so bad. And Danielle's there with her service dog. I'll talk about her in a minute. I'm like, oh my God, the four of us have major medical problems. What is wrong with us? So, anyway, Amanda was born by emergency C-section. She was in the NICU 5 weeks. Andrea was in the hospital for a week. I found that very traumatic at the time. I had nightmares for years every time I would watch, I would try to watch like a medical show or something like that. I did. I had to stop watching shows with any sort of medical stuff. I'd literally leave the room because I knew I would have trouble sleeping that night. Our younger daughter in high school started to develop problems with her hip. We went to an orthopedist who said she had a labral tear that needed to be fixed by surgery. He went in and did the surgery and destroyed her hip. This is an objective fact at this point. He scraped out a large portion of the cartilage in her hip, permanently disabling her. It was a mistake. It just happened to affect my daughter. She will eventually face a series of hip replacements over the course of her life. And the question has been in the last couple of years, it's just, how long do you wait until the pain's bad enough to do the first hip replacement? Because the longer you wait, the better, because the more hip replacements you have. Hip replacements are for old people. They're not really made for young people. And they wear out in 10 to 15 years in your average old person. And the outcomes get worse and worse the more you have. Your femur starts to shrink, and your femur can break, that kind of thing. So, but that was very, her becoming disabled was a big loss for her, and a big loss for us. I was always sad about that for her, because she and Amanda both were very active and physical kids in sports. They enjoyed it. Andrea and I were nerds. We were in band, but Amanda and her sister were in sports, and Ellie until she was injured. My aunt, I have been waiting for a phone call for 45 years that she has died overnight. My aunt is obese and has some long-term health problems, so we were always constantly on edge waiting for her to die. She has outlived my mother at this point. It's probably going to outlive her sister. I have no idea how. But just her illness was always sort of hovering over our lives. I have a lung issue called sarcoidosis. Your sister has it? I'm in what's the right term? I'm in a good group. It is mostly a disease of Southern black women. How I got it, I have no idea. It is technically an autoimmune disorder, but it affects people a lot by putting, what are they called, granulomas, so like little pockets of scar tissue in the soft tissue areas of your body. And for a lot of people, that's their lungs, and that's what happened to me. They thought I had lung cancer for a while. This happened about 20 odd years ago. So that was a big deal. I had a very difficult treatment. I was on prednisone for about a year, which I have plenty of stories about that. Andrea has plenty of stories about that. And I have some long-term damage from that. When I was growing up, we had 3 major deaths in the families around us. One of my, of the people I went to elementary, middle, and high school with, one committed suicide. Her brother died in a car wreck. So my parents' friends lost 2 of their 3 kids. My parents' other friend lost 1 of their kids to a drunk driving accident as well. So there was a lot of tragedy for us, around us. And for us, what that meant is, my God, if it's happened to everybody who we are close to, when's it going to happen to us? So my mom died about 5 years prior to the accident. It's about 6.5 years ago now. Honestly, I've never quite gotten over that. I was very close to my mother. So girls were very close to my mother. Andrea was close to my mother. She was a wonderful lady. The large one was Andrea's father, who died suddenly about 3 weeks prior to the accident. Andrea's father was a retired priest with the Episcopal Church. He had developed, he'd always had an alcohol problem and was drinking heavily at the time of his death. His health had suffered. We're not sure if he had a heart attack and fell down the stairs, or if he fell down the stairs and had a heart attack. But he had died suddenly in his apartment in Brooklyn. After we hadn't had any contact with him for 3, 4 days, a week or so, Andrea's brother called and said, "We're worried about Dad." The police did a wellness check and found him deceased on the floor. Because it was an unattended death in New York City, the house was a bit of a mess, and he also had a gun in the house. He had his grandfather's old shotgun, which is very illegal in New York City, by the way. So anyway, the police reacted in such a way that they sealed his apartment, and it took a while for us to be allowed to get in. We had just been allowed to get in to go and clean things up and go and look for the will a little bit. You have to go through a court process, and we had to go down to the police department and get a key to the apartment, that kind of thing. So we were very sad about the death of Andrea's father. We also, I think one of the things that was very upsetting about it all is he had, I think, fallen several times. He had some pretty big gashes on his head. And we'd spent a day cleaning up his apartment. He hadn't taken care of his apartment very well, but also cleaning up a lot of blood. There was blood all over the apartment where he had fallen and bled. So that was not a particularly happy time in our lives. And I'll never forget this. We were leaving, and his neighbor proceeded to pass out, and we had to call the ambulance for her. So we had had just a nightmare day the day before. So the day of the accident, we had woken up that morning and said, you know something, we're really bummed. This has been a rough couple of weeks. How about we go visit the girls? We'd had the day off. It was Veterans Day. We were going to go visit Amanda on Friday and Danielle, our younger daughter, on Saturday. Actually, fun fact, Bill was probably the last non-family member I talked to before the accident. We were texting that morning. So anyway, this series of things explains some of my predisposition to this kind of trauma. And when I was thinking this through, and I kept typing things in, and the font got smaller and smaller and smaller the more I typed, I went, oh my God, Dan, you're a mess. So anyway, that is the setting events. The takeaway lessons: trauma isn't just the incident. Trauma is the sum of multiple factors, and traumas compound. It's in that you stack up a bunch of weaknesses, you've got somebody who's going to have more problems, not less. It's not like a bunch of small things mean I'm able to deal with all the small things. It's those small things turn into a big thing. Okay, I'm going to go through a description of the accident. I'm going to talk a little about our injuries and process of physical recovery. So I'm going to try to put about a year into a short period of time. As I said, we were driving up to see Amanda. We were driving north on Route 414. We happened to be a couple miles south of Geneva. Anyone know where Port's restaurant is?
Yes.
Up there? It's somewhere between 400 yards and 1/10 of a mile south of that was where the accident was. It was at 11 o'clock in the morning, slightly drizzly day. We were driving along. There was a truck coming the opposite direction. We were going north. The truck was going south. I don't care what the driver says, he wasn't paying attention. He barreled into a car in his lane. He rear-ended the car in front of him, who was slowing down. I saw the whole thing. He was going full speed. He wasn't slowing down. He hit the car in front of him. That startled him. He veered to the left and veered into our lane and hit us. If I read the police report correctly, we were going, I had about 3/4 of a second to step on the brake, and he had a moment to step on the brake too after hitting the car in front of him. But if I read the police report correctly, we were probably going about 43 miles an hour at the time of the impact, and he was probably going about 48. So we hit it about a 90 mile per hour combined rate. I remember him veering to the left, and I remember, it's amazing how much time you have in this moment to think things through, because I thought to myself, what do I do? If I turn left, if I veer to the left, I'm going to hit the car that he just hit, and I'm going to hit the truck. If I go straight, remember I was driving, Andrea was in the passenger seat. If I go straight, the truck is going to hit mostly Andrea. If I veer to the right, then I'm only going to get hit by the truck. I'm not going to go under the truck, which I don't want to do. And I can put some of myself in the car in between the truck and Andrea. So I'll show you some photos. Don't worry, these aren't gruesome. These aren't gruesome, but this is the image I see over and over again in my head, is that truck coming toward us. The truck, yeah, this is obviously the accident. They've yanked open the doors. You can see, this was a Honda Accord EXL. It was a long car. It jammed the engine right up into us. Andrea was life-flighted to Strong Hospital. They had somebody there in about 10 minutes. I blacked out for a few seconds. I still remember this. I blacked out for a few seconds, but woke up before anybody got to the door. Oh yeah, there's the truck. We killed the truck. That made me really happy. So, that made me really happy. So Andrea was life flighted to Strong. I was taken by ambulance. They would have taken me by ambulance. I remember hearing them talking about not having a second helicopter. I'm going to talk about myself real quickly, and then I will talk about Andrea. I'm a faster discussion than Andrea. I had 10 fractures. My foot and ankle were crushed. My pelvis was broken. My back was broken. 4 ribs, my sternum and my nose were broken. So I had 10 fractures. I spent a total of 12 days in the ICU step-down unit, so I was more important than a regular room would warrant. I wasn't at the ICU level that Andrea was, but I was close enough, and they put me on the ICU step-down unit for those 12 days. Andrea had 3 major injury sets. First injury were orthopedic injuries. I don't know how many you had, at least as many as me, but you know, her pelvis was broken, her legs were broken. Both sort of tibias, left femur, chest was crushed, all of that. Andrea's all metal, by the way. If Andrea goes through an airport, she looks like a Terminator, you know? So, she had some severe internal injuries. I was bruised. I was sort of a purple black from here all the way down to here. We were both cut up pretty badly from the glass that hit us, my face and hands and arms and that kind of thing. And Andrea too. Andrea has some scars. Mine didn't scar, which kind of bums me out. I wanted the scars, to be honest with you. Andrea had some severe internal injuries. She had a perforated diaphragm. Her heart was bruised. Most importantly, she had a lot of internal bleeding. Some of her intestine had been crushed, just, you know, and had to be removed. Another part of her intestine had torn off the blood supply in the back, and that had to be removed and fixed. So that's what almost killed her, was the internal bleeding. And Andrea also has a brain injury. She has a traumatic brain injury. It's called a diffuse axonal injury, grade 2, moderate to severe. I think I'm right when I say it's basically shaken baby syndrome. It's where it's not like a hit to the head. It's where your brain accelerates and decelerates very quickly, and the axons get stretched and ripped. So Andrea had a very severe brain injury. Andrea was in a coma for roughly 2 weeks. It was a real live coma. This was not like an induced coma. It was a real live coma. You were on a respirator for a week or so. You were able to transition off of that. Eventually, she was placed on a medicine called amantadine, and it slowly started to wake her up a little bit. Started opening her eyes a little. She spent about an additional 2 weeks in something called a disorder of consciousness. There's lots of stages that I won't bore you with along the way. So about a total of a month in the ICU. After that, Andrea was transferred to an acute rehab. Andrea's legs were completely stabilized at this point. She wasn't allowed to put any weight on them. She was completely bedridden. So she went to the acute rehab to heal and to start doing what she could in terms of physical therapy and speech therapy. After the first month and Andrea was out of the disorder of consciousness, Andrea was talking. She recognized us. Andrea always recognized us. She forgot our names for a while, but she always recognized us. She always knew we were family and people who cared about her and people who she cared about. Funny story. Andrea Andrea, when she doesn't know something, just acts really confident about it. And what did she call you one day?
So because sometimes we'd ask her, we were kind of mean. We'd be like, what's our name? Like, tell me like what my full name is. And she looks at me like straight in the eyes, very stoked, and she goes, Amanda Elizabeth Cohen. And I mean, obviously my name is Amanda Cohen. That is not my middle name. My name is Helen. So, but she was very matter of fact, and Amanda Elizabeth Cohen, that's your name. There was no Elizabeth in our family. Like, I don't know where Elizabeth came from, but,
Choice number 2.
yeah.
So,
She was testing to make sure you knew your name.
Oh, exactly.
we have some great stories about how Andrea, it really bothered the girls that Andrea didn't recognize them or had trouble with their memory at times. So they would drill her.
I was so bad about it.
I hope she was. I very quickly, they figured out what the nurses and doctors were testing for. There's a test that they have to do every 4 hours. I mean, literally, they wake up in the middle and they do it every 4 hours to test how our brain's functioning. Anyway, the girls figured out really quickly what that was and would start drilling Andrea on the answers. And Andrea would sometimes be able to answer those, and the girls would coach her, and she would get to do them. And then the doctor would come in, and she wouldn't say anything. And because she's kind of like, screw you, I have control of this, I was not going to answer you. And then the doctors would leave, and the girls would literally look at Andrea and say, they think we are that family. They think we are that family. Mom, this is your fault. I'll never forget that. So, Andrea's first words, I just have to say, were her giving crap to the occupational therapist, by the way. We saw her actually not too long ago, and Andrea's first words were, I blame Bridget, which is her name, and she was being harassed for something, and Andrea just agreed that it was her fault. I'll never forget, all of us just went, what? She just talked. Anyway, Andrea spent a month in the ICU, 5 weeks in the acute rehab, learning to stand and take a couple steps again, doing some speech therapy. I didn't realize this, but a lot of speech therapy is cognitive work these days, which Amanda always knew, but I didn't realize until we got there. There was a lot of occupational therapy, that kind of thing. Did 5 weeks there, and then Andrea did 5 weeks in a nursing home in what's called subacute rehab. It's basically, you're in a nursing home, you get a little more PT and speech therapy than everybody else gets, until she was ready to come home. Andrea started being able to remember things after about 2 months. You're in a stage called post-traumatic amnesia for a while, where your brain can't lay down long-term memories. So Andrea could talk to us, she had conversations with us, but wouldn't remember what she talked about or what happened the day before until about 2 months in. So I'm fond of saying Andrea basically remembers the day before the accident and essentially woke up in early to mid-January. Accident was November 11th, 2022. So after that, Andrea came home. She was able to stand and walk a little bit at that point. I took off several months of work to stay home and take care of her. Andrea was physically well enough to come home, but obviously needed help getting around, couldn't take care of herself, so I needed to stay home and help her. But I forgot to mention, I was in a wheelchair for a while. I was in a wheelchair for quite a while, and eventually I'm graduated to using crutches. And then I was able to, what? I hated that scooter.
Yeah, you have.
It was cool. It was cool, but I hated it.
You don't like to have to do like a hand.
So I used crutches for a while, and then eventually was able to walk again. I still have some ongoing pain. I have some every day. I'm very lucky in that some days I don't have a lot of it, but I do have some ongoing pain every day. Andrea has some long-term problems with her legs and orthopedics and hip. You were complaining about your hip last night, that kind of thing. Andrea's had a reconstructive surgery on her abdomen. She had a lot of injury to her abdomen. Basically, the seatbelt during the accident cut her abdomen in half. It was all internal, it was not external, but her muscle was cut in half, everything was crushed in there, that kind of thing. When Dr. Stassen did the emergency surgery, she went in vertically and sliced Andrea vertically, so Andrea had a cross, basically. Well, no, you wouldn't have had the horizontal scar, but you had the vertical scar. You just had the horizontal injury. After about a year, they went back and repaired some of that for Andrea. She has a band around her abdomen to hold everything in. Her what's the right term? Abdominal wall was destroyed.
So she didn't have enough like skin or muscle tissue to like reconnect it, so she has a scar that probably goes from like here to here, where we had like a wound back on it for 2 months.
Oh yeah, I didn't
to
talk
try
about
and-
that.
Yeah, to try and heal that, so that was on there for 2 months, and then, the scar kind of healed over itself, but.
I forgot to talk about that. Andrea, yeah.
Basically like an alien on her stomach that was taking like blood and tissue out
Yeah.
and making new cells for like 2 months, so.
Andrea basically had an open wound for 7 months because after all of the surgeries, her abdomen was too swollen to close. So she had what was called a wound vacuum. Basically a vacuum, a big plastic piece that goes over it that sort of sucks out all the bad gum and sort of lets it heal, and skin over time sort of forms over the open part. Andrea had that 2 months in the hospital. And then when she came home, I changed the dressings on it every day at least. So I got to be a nurse. I changed Andrea's dressings, I gave her shots, I did all of that when she was home. I know you wanted to. Oh, those shots were terrible. Those shots were terrible. Anyway, let me see if I know I forgot a lot. So I took several months off to take care of Andrea. Andrea did PT, OT, and speech therapy. So at times we were going to about 12 appointments a week in terms of going to therapy. Yeah. And we realized very quickly, and this is very common with TBIs, that Andrea's vision was screwed up. We figured out she had 2 basic problems. One is that her eyes weren't working physically correctly. They were weak. They weren't necessarily lining up correctly. So that caused vision problems. There were also problems with the way her brain was processing the information from the eyes. This is actually kind of an interesting segue in rabbit hole. One of the things that I have come to realize about the medical care is that, and this makes sense when you think about it, their job is to save your life and move you out. That's their job. That's their job. It's your job to pick it up from there and figure out how to take care of yourself. And we learned very quickly that you have to advocate for things and you have to make things happen. Andrea came home. We didn't realize how bad Andrea's vision was until she came home. And when I realized, she couldn't see anything, she was getting horrible headaches whenever she tried to read or watch TV, I started calling around. I called an ophthalmologist, and they said, oh yeah, you have to get a referral, and we'll get you in about 2 months. And I'm like, well, screw that. I'm not going to wait 2 months for care, and started checking around. We got very lucky. We found a vision therapist in up towards Ithaca who was phenomenal. There are vision therapists out there. I didn't know, and they did lots of exercises and stuff with Andrea. I think he went basically every week for about 8 months. It was one of the biggest terms, I can't say enough good things about vision therapy. My working opinion is I'm skeptical of everything, but I will try anything. And I thought, frankly, it was bullpucky. But Andrea was desperate, and I was desperate. And, we decided to try it. I'm the biggest fan. They were phenomenal. Okay. Have I missed anything, kids? I see the accident over and over and over again. I saw everything. I remember everything. When I talk about flashbacks, and I'm not going to talk about this much, but this is the bulk of my PTSD right here, is what happened in the first few seconds. I'm in the car, I wake up, and I look around, and the interior of the car is frankly pretty gruesome. There's a lot of blood. You know, I come to realize pretty quickly that something terrible has happened, and I gradually start to think more and more, this is really, really bad. My first thought, frankly, was I looked at the dashboard of the car and I thought to myself, I don't think they're going to be able to fix that because it was crushed. But there was a lot of blood in the car. I remember the truck coming towards us and not being able to do anything. I often say our lives changed in that 3/4 of a second in ways that we never expected. When I talk about flashbacks, I see that over and over and over and over and over again. And that can happen during the day, it can happen at night. I was unable to reach Andrea. My leg was crushed and pinned. And frankly, I'd been crushed. Remember, my chest was crushed, my pelvis was broken, my back was broken. I remember looking over and seeing Andrea, and she sort of draped, being held up by her seatbelt. When I reached down, I was somehow able to unhook my seatbelt. I was able to push the button. I remember it unhooking, and I tried to get up, and I couldn't. So I yelled at you. Anyway, you started moaning at that point, and then I knew you were still alive because my first thought was, So my first thought was, how am I going to tell the girls that the mom's dead? I said we were going to get granular. I'm going to get granular. That's what happened. There was a lot of physical pain. It hurt a lot. I have some great stories about it, by the way. So let's move into something funny. It hurt a lot. Did I say that? It hurt a lot. I was yelling because I couldn't, I was in an awful lot of pain. And I remember, I remember in the ambulance, I remember somebody on the phone, one of the EMTs, they were obviously talking to the doctor, and they're like, I've given him 2 doses of fentanyl and it hasn't touched it. Can I give him some ketamine? If anybody ever offers you ketamine, take it. It is phenomenal. I felt better then than I do now. It was wonderful. Let me tell you, ketamine makes you hallucinate. I saw things. I will never see again. I encourage it. I mean, don't get injured, but honest to God, that was fantastic. I forgot how much I liked drugs. That was wonderful. So, anyway, ketamine was wonderful. That was things that I saw. I was on a magic carpet ride. That was fabulous. I was telling one of the anesthesiologists about that afterwards, and a couple weeks after, and he goes, you know something, people either have a really good experience or a really bad experience. I'm like, well, I had a good one. Let me tell you.
Thank God for some small things.
So, okay. Let me get my notes caught up. So anyway, I would have flashbacks for well over a year. Let's talk about the combination of factors that caused those to develop, because they weren't just because of what happened in the car that day. What happened in the car was one incident. You combine that with, all of the setting events that we discussed. That's not the whole story. There were some long-term things that really exacerbated my symptoms, and I think it's important to add these to the mix. I had a lot of fear, grief, and again, this list is really long, the font's really small. A lot of fear and uncertainty related to Andrea's injuries. When Andrea first was injured, it was realistic that she could die. That was a realistic possibility. While they did surgery to salvage her abdomen and save her life, she was in such a fragile state, they didn't take care of her legs. She basically had broken legs for several days to a week before they were willing to go in there and sort of try to fix things, because they said she wouldn't survive the surgery if they tried to keep going. Then they were pretty clear they weren't sure if she was going to wake up. And then they were very clear that if she woke up, she was in a bad state, and they were preparing us for non-responsive nursing home kinds of stuff. It's a really, really bad situation. That caused a lot of fears for us. You know, what happens if Andrea dies? What happens if Andrea lives? You know, what's her life gonna be like? And what's our life gonna be like? At the same time, a lot of physical pain, loss of physical abilities. I didn't get out of bed for a week. I couldn't move. Andrea was in the hospital in rehab 9 weeks, and then an additional 5 weeks in the subacute rehab. So we had 14 weeks, 3.5 months of daily, all day, every day in medical care. I was triggered constantly, and we weren't home. We were away from home. We spent 5 major holidays in the hospital. We spent Thanksgiving. We had that in the hotel room. We had Christmas in the hotel room. We had New Year's in the hotel room. We had President's Day and my birthday in your apartment. And then we, in your apartment. And then we had
her birthday.
Oh yes, your birthday too. It's your birthday? I didn't know. So and then Valentine's Day. Andrea was released on the 17th of February. Let's see. The quality. I'm not going to comment a lot on this, but the quality of medical care can be inconsistent at times. You know, as Carrie well knows, can be inconsistent at times. The medical system right now is in a state of crisis. It does not have enough people, simply does not have enough people. And the people that they do have, they're forced to keep the people that aren't very good. There are many, there's, the big picture over here is that healthcare is wonderful. Healthcare is phenomenal. The smaller picture over here is there are pockets of healthcare that just aren't working. And that could be very stressful for us because we worried a great deal about Andrea. One suggestion I have, if you are in a situation, whether it's inpatient or outpatient, where you're worried your family member isn't getting the medical care that they need or deserve, every medical system has a patient patient relations department. Use them. Do not hesitate to ask questions. Do not hesitate to push things. Go straight to patient relations if you have trouble. We did have some issues, and I'm not going to go into those today. It's not fair to do that without them being here to talk about their perspective on things. But I will say that they would say that it is acceptable to bump things up the chain very quickly to talk with a nurse manager or a unit manager or to patient relations if you're worried something isn't happening medically. So that upset me a great deal and upset the girls a great deal and added a lot of stress to us. We worried about the quality of Andrea's care. This is while I'm trying to get better, and during the same time that I'm in hospital. I lost my role of being a strong father. If I am going to fault my parenting at all when the girls were younger, it was because I may have been too stoic or too tough at times. I'm not going to go the other way and say I was too lenient. Maybe sometimes, but not most of the time. I couldn't be strong. I was a mess. I mean, I was just a mess. I was a mess physically. I was a mess mentally. I couldn't do that anymore. That really bothered me. Everyone I cared about the most in my life were all deep, deep pain. It's not like this happened to all of us. I'm sure one of us. This happened to all of us. A lot of financial fears, you know. Medical care is expensive, and we have wonderful insurance. We were very, very lucky, but let's face it, medical care is expensive. Transition home, while it was happy, meant I was providing care for Andrea 24 hours a day. So that affected my sleep. It affected how I was caring for her at a time where I was also trying to take care of myself. Constant triggers for many, many months. Don't worry, I'm not going to talk about that stuff forever. There's a good part of this story. These were my symptoms. I put flashbacks towards the bottom, but they were probably the biggest. A lot of distress, hard time calming down. Remember that precognitive reaction of every time you're triggered, precognitively your body says, okay, I've got to fight for survival right now. I was constantly in a state of heavy awareness. A lot of crying, frankly, cried a lot. Carrie has probably seen me cry more than any human being since my mother raising me. And I'm literally saying that. She has seen me more than cry more than Andrea has, and we've been together 30 years. She's seen me cry more than the girls have, because I don't want to cry around them all that much. But yeah, I cried all the time. Loss of appetite, I couldn't eat, and anhedonia, loss of interest in a lot of things that I used to enjoy. I still don't watch a lot of TV. I watch movies with Andrea, and I enjoy that, but when Andrea goes to bed, I don't watch an awful lot. A lot of nightmares. I don't have as many of those anymore. A lot of difficulty sleeping. Sleeping has been an ongoing problem for me. I was having some sleep problems before the accident, but after the accident, I had a lot of insomnia, a lot of early morning awakening. I had days I would come to the hospital, I'd been up since 2 or 2:30 in the morning, and that's after going to bed at 10:30 at night. A lot of early morning waking. So those were my symptoms. Oh my goodness, how depressing. Why did you come to this training? I'm sure you're asking yourself that right now. On the takeaways, I was susceptible to a medically related trauma. As I said, my body was constantly in a fight or flight mode, and I had daily triggers. Here's some photos. Again, nothing too bad. Well, not good, but the one on the far right is Andrea. Andrea's several days into the accident. She's on a ventilator there. That's our younger daughter, and the one on the left, and Andrea still had a thing on her neck. They weren't sure her neck was okay. The one in the middle is Amanda helping Andrea with her hair. See how her hair is still all nice and long? Guess what? It's only on half her head, because they
shaved half of my head. And they won't shave your whole head when they place it right in your brain. They only shave half of it, like the part that they have to. So I had to cut and shave her head, which made her very upset.
yes.
She was not very happy.
Funny story about that is Amanda asked if she should cut her hair off in solidarity. Look at Amanda's hair, isn't it long and beautiful? So, but she said, Mom, should I cut my hair off for you? And Andrea said, yes. Yes, you should.
It's like, okay, like, you want me to shave my head? I was like, what about Dad? Should he shave his head? No. Oh, well, what about Ellie? Should Ellie shave her head? No. But you want me to shave my head? Yes. I didn't shave my head.
Amanda asked Andrea several times a day for 2 or 3 days until Andrea finally said, okay, don't shave your head.
She said, no, these are her words. She said, let the drama die down first. And I said, all right, I'll take it. That's a no for me.
So okay, here are some other pictures of us. Here's a picture of Andrea in the rehab. And as you can see, her legs are still all wrapped up because the bones were so bad. There's a picture of Danielle with her service dog she was allowed to bring in to see Andrea.
That was the first time she had to see Ruby after the accident.
There's Danielle crawled into bed at the nursing home with Andrea. There's Amanda helping Andrea home when she finally came home. And I love that picture of Amanda and Danielle at the hotel where we lived for several months.
And our Christmas tree.
Yeah, and our Christmas tree. You'll notice we're smiling in a lot of these pictures. I noticed that later. We have a tight family. I think more than anything else, my family has saved me, and I think we have saved. I think we have saved each other. I think that's a good way of putting it. Okay, I wanted you to have a few minutes, if Amanda was willing, for Amanda to talk about her perspective. This type of trauma is not something that just happened to me. It happened to all of us. Andrea has her own story to tell. It's just not a story about trauma and PTSD. Amanda and Danielle have their own story to tell about trauma. because they're the ones that got the call that their parents were severely injured. They're the ones that had to make decisions for us for the first couple of days. Amanda and Danielle spent several weeks while they were upset, sort of managing crazy family members and, you know, blocking entrance to the folks who came in who, you know, we had some visitors who we just frankly didn't want to see. We just had too much going on. And Amanda and Danielle ran interference with them. They really stepped up to the plate in a way that I don't think most people my age could have done. So we're very proud of them, but they have their own story to tell. And you want to take a couple minutes and talk a little about that?
Yeah, sure.
You want to sit up here?
All right, so I'm Amanda, as we've kind of established. So I'm their oldest daughter. At the time that this happened, I was 23, Ellie was about 21. So when they were on their way to see me. So, and if you know my parents, like they're always, and not that he's not texting while driving, whatever, but they always answer their phones. So they left around, I believe they were supposed to get there around like 12 or 12:30. They left the house at like 10. And it gets to be about 12:30 and they're not there. So I'm like naturally, like I'm a very anxious person in general, like at baseline, and then my parents are at my apartment, what's going on? So I start calling them, and so I call my mom first, because I know like my dad always drove, she's not answering. And I was like, strange, but I'll call dad, like maybe, I don't know, she's sleeping, whatever. Called dad, nothing, nobody's answering their phone. And I tried like multiple times. So at this point I'm getting pretty worked up, I'm like something has to be wrong, my parents always answer their phone. So I call my sister, she hangs up on me, because she's in class. So I'm calling my aunt, even though she lives in Maryland, but I'm just like, I need to figure out like if anybody's heard. Nobody had heard. So it's like 12:45 now, I'm pacing outside of my apartment to see like if the car's there, and nobody's there, nobody's answering. Eventually, like I'm calling the police, I call 911, I'm calling the police, and I didn't know what route they took. I didn't know if they're going through Ithaca or if they're going through Geneva. So I initially called like the Cortland and the Ithaca police, and I was like, have you heard of a car accident? I don't know where my parents are. And they were in an accident. I was like, there's no explanation for why they're not answering their phones. Eventually, Ellie gets a phone call. I'm getting frantic texts from my aunt saying, hang up the phone with the police, you need to call your sister. So I call Ellie, and she's like, mom's critical condition. We need to go to Rochester now. So, and Ellie is she's like my dad, she's very stoic. She's very matter of fact, so she's like, Mom, Dad, we're in a car accident, we need to go. And meanwhile, I'm on the ground, I'm wailing, I'm sobbing, and I was like, all right, we gotta go. So my boyfriend was there at the time, so him and I, we put a bunch of crap in a bag, and he threw me in the car, and we drove to Rochester as fast as we could. Neither of us really knew the severity of the event, and it wasn't really explained to us until probably like 2 or 3 days after the accident happened. But we kind of like got the feeling that it was bad, because as soon as we walked into the emergency department, I'm like, my name's Amanda. They're like, your parents were in the accident. I said, yeah, yes, that'd be me, yes. And immediately a social worker's pulled out. They walk us to the emergency department to see my dad laying there. And that was pretty horrific, because, you know, obviously I was adult at the time, but I grew up and my parents always took care of me, and this was a time where, like, we really had to take care of them, and at that point, nobody else from our family could have made it, so it was really just Ellie and I, like, making the calls. And the first thing we see is just my dad's face, like, covered in blood, like, it hadn't been wiped off yet, and he's on high on ketamine, so he's like, hey guys! Like, don't know where your mom is, she's in surgery, she's fine, and I'm like, okay. So, it was pretty bad. We didn't get to see her, I don't even remember, it was such a blur, like I don't know if we got to see Mom that night or not, because she was rushed to the OR and into the ICU, intubated, sedated, all the whole 9 yards, right? So, again, still, like the social worker was there, but it was more like, here's your dad, and then she kind of like left him. This wasn't Carrie. Carrie would have stayed by her side, and it was fine, like she had other things to do. Eventually, my dad gets moved up to the ICU step-down unit. I don't know if Mom was still in the OR or where she was at the time, but I don't think we had seen her yet. And a bunch of medical students approach us, and they kind of throw us in this conference room, and they're talking to us about some study, like, that they want Mom to participate in. They're like, we're going to take your mom's intracranial pressure from this, they had to hook her brain up to a drain to basically get all the blood and extra fluid and stuff that had built up because the brain injury was so severe, which we had to sign for. We had to, literally give consent for them to drill a hole in her head for the EVD, which, was another thing I never really imagined we had to do. But we're in this conference room, these med students are here, not even the doctors. We hadn't really seen the doctors yet because she was still probably in the OR. And they're just like, so we're gonna do this study where we take your mom's intracranial pressure every 2, 4, 6, 8 weeks down the line. She'll come back in 6 months, yada, yada, yada. And we're like, hold on, my parents live 2 hours away. What do you mean? We're not gonna keep driving back up to Rochester for you to do this study when they live 2 hours away. That seems like a real inconvenience, guys. And they were like, oh, with your mom's injury, she's gonna be in the ICU for about a month. And that was the first, we hadn't talked to any doctors, we had no clue. And so, and the fact that a medical student gave us that information, just asking us about a study, that was pretty horrifying for us. The next day, Ellie had to take the LSAT, so it was just me, my dad, high ketamine holder, drive back to Buffalo, go take the LSAT, it's your last chance, girl, go do it. So she drove back to Buffalo, she took the LSAT, so it was just, I don't even know where I stayed. I stayed at my friend's house because I had friends in Rochester, so my boyfriend Brian and I stayed overnight. I made him wake up, and Brian's going through his own stuff, his best friend's dad just died of pancreatic cancer, literally the day after the accident, so we were both kind of going through it. But then the next day was when we really get the news, okay guys, it's bad, We got to see my mom at that point. Dad was probably not high on ketamine anymore, so he was a little bit more stable. But that was the first couple events, and at that point it was just me and Brian and Dr. Sassing who did all of my mom's abdominal surgeries and all of that. She kind of sat us down in the ICU waiting room and was like, listen, your mom's never gonna be the same again. These injuries are really severe. It's bad, And again, we were still in that limbo time where we didn't even know if she was gonna survive because they couldn't do all the operations yet because she was too unstable and she couldn't lie flat because her intracranial pressure just spiked whenever she was laying down flat, so it was a couple days before the surgeries. Let's see. For those of you guys who don't know, I'm a speech language pathologist, and at the time I was in early intervention working with kids. So I had a lot of flexibility in my schedule, so I was able to take, I would work 3 days a week, spend 4 days in the hospital, taking care of my parents and being there for them. But I guess I need to round this out to trauma too, but that's part of the trauma, is I was working with kids, then mom sustained a severe TBI, and so I said, heck with these children, I'm done. I don't want to work with kids anymore. So after I finished my first year in early intervention, I applied on a whim to upstate, where I now work primarily with the neuro population. I'm on the neuro floor doing cognitive intervention and swallowing intervention for all of my TBI friends and stroke population. So that's, a positive part of the trauma that came from it is I found a new job that I love way more than working with kids, where I get to help people and families every day, and I think it gives me a really unique perspective on it because I get to share with, it's not I'm your speech therapist, my mom has a brain injury, so I know what I'm doing, right? But it gives me a really unique perspective on that point. But in terms of trauma, I was in the accident, I don't have flashbacks, I don't have any of that. But I still, Rochester. I went to undergrad in Rochester, so it was a place where I loved, my second family was there, and now Rochester became a place where I was scared to go. I still, a lot of my friends have since moved out of Rochester, but I hated driving to Rochester. Every time I would, even though, that's not where the car accident was, but just the idea of being in Rochester where, we literally lived in a hotel room for 3 months. Or not 3, it was only 2. But where we lived in a hotel room for 2 months, and all the uncertainty about being there, and, we went through a lot with, sometimes she didn't get the care that she needed. So it was really, traumatic just being in Rochester and trying to, have a good time and decompress with my friends who still lived there. But I was always, I had panic attacks every time I was in Rochester, because all I could think about is, this is where I had to live for 2.5 months while my mom, almost died. I hate driving. I hate it. I didn't like it before. I don't like it now either. And so whenever I see a truck, it's immediate, we're white knuckling the steering wheel, cause I don't know if it's gonna hit me, because I'm just scared that like, and then it's the other fear of like, I can't get in a car accident because I can't put my family through the same trauma that we've already been through again, you know? So I don't even like getting into a car because I'm like, if I get hit today, like what are mom and dad gonna do? Like it's not gonna be pretty. So, and still to this, like with just seeing trucks, like I'm getting past them as quickly as I can. I'm watching their every move because I'm just petrified that I'm gonna get hit, or like I'm just gonna accidentally veer into them. You know, we just don't know. What else?
Are you able to talk a little about what has helped you over the last year and a half to go from, you know, the first couple of weeks and months, which were very early and traumatic and stressful, to, you know, the last 6 months to a year?
Yeah.
You know, what has changed, and how has that changed for you?
Yeah. I think like one of the things that my dad has said a lot too is we were a close family before, but we got even closer when this all happened, and we kind of had to because it was just us. Because some of our extended family's like fine, but some of them aren't. So it was really just the four of us that had to stick together. So, and I think what helped, as much as my dad says like, I don't want to cry in front of the girls, like he cried in front of, like the only time I'd ever seen my dad cry was when our childhood dog died. And so like after this accident, it was like we were crying on the couch every night together, you know, like in the hotel room. And so I think just seeing like him really vulnerable, because he, even at the beginning, he was like, well girls, it's gonna be fine, like your mom's gonna be okay, she has to be okay. And as a speech pathologist, and I know brain injury like decently well, it's what I treat every day of my life, I knew it wasn't going to be okay. And I mean, it is okay. Like mom is doing fantastic, obviously, like there's still some stuff, but, you know, but I just knew in the back of my head, I was like, things are, it's bad, like it's a diffuse axonal injury, like whatever. But we came together really close. My sister and I, we always headbutt each other, like we don't get along great, but we did a very good job of collaborating and being there for each other through the time too. My boyfriend Brian, I feel so bad for him because we'd only been dating for a year at the time of the accident. And so I was like, this is still kind of new. I was like, you don't need to do this. I'm like, you can run. Like, this is kind of bad, you know, but he stuck by me, and he was a huge support for me and my family at the time too. And he's still around, so we're doing pretty well. And I think the other thing is just my sense of purpose as a speech therapist. I think like this accident was a huge turning point for me. And then I was able to say, I went through this truly traumatic, god-awful event, and now I can be one of the providers that we didn't have when we were going through it. And I can be a support to like these patients and their families and provide therapy and like education in a way that I wouldn't have been able to do if we didn't go through this. And so I think that's what's really helped me a lot, because I could kind of find a new purpose in it, and I'm able to wrap my head around cognition and brain injury in such a different way now to help me in my practice, and to help, like I get a lot of purpose and a lot of my own strength, I think, from being able to help other people. And obviously it's a different way than all of you, because you guys are all social workers and you do it from a mental health perspective, but like I get to do it from a brain injury perspective and doing cognitive therapy and helping, and I work directly in acute care, like on the neuro ICU a lot, so I see these patients and these families truly at their worst, where we were back in the day. So I think that's really helped. That's kind of what I'm doing. But I wouldn't have been able to do it without him, without my mom, of course, or without Carrie, because Carrie really helped us together too. She truly, Carrie followed. She didn't have to follow us either after we were off on the ICU, and it was because of her that we like. So we're very grateful for you, because if it wasn't for Carrie, we just wouldn't be in the place we wouldn't have had the support. So we're all very thankful for like healthcare, like just social workers in general, because like I said, if it wasn't for Carrie, my dad wouldn't be where he was, and we wouldn't be where we were. So.
I promise things are gonna get better. Such terrible stuff. I'm like, oh my God, poor people. You just dragged them into the nightmare. Okay. What time is it? How are we doing time with this? Oh my word. Okay, let's talk about some fun stuff. Let's start talking about recovery. Yep. then are we offended? Why do we complain? This is what we are here for. It's a Stoic philosopher named Seneca. I'll also read, no one said life would be easy. No one said it would be fair. However, don't forget that you come from a long, unbroken line of ancestors who survived unimaginable adversity. It's their genes and blood that run through your body right now. You're an heir to an impressive tradition, and as their viable offspring, you are capable of what they are capable of. You are meant for this. That was written by Ryan Holiday and Stephen Hanselman, who wrote a book called The Daily Stoic, which I'll be talking about later. But one of the things that I think about commonly with our experience is not that it was somehow unique, it was that it's quite mundane. It is a unique experience to us. It is a unique situation to us. But no family, nobody in here has a family that's immune to trauma and tragedy. Everybody has trauma and tragedy in their life. It's not like we're something special. And for everything that we have gone through, as awful as it has been at times, I can think of 100 people who would give everything they own for one day to be in our situation, because their situation is somehow worse. I think about that a lot. Okay, recovery. In the interest of time, I'm going to skip this video, and I may skip some of the other videos. I have about at least a half hour more of videos, and it's 3 o'clock, and I've chattered on more than I should have, so I'm going to skip this video. Basically, it is Dr. Hessel Vanderkolk talking about some of his general approaches to treatment, and I'm going to discuss them exactly the way not exactly the way he describes them, but I'm going to discuss them instead of having you watch the videos and discuss them. No, I'm skipping it. He has 3 general categories of treatment modalities. The first is top-down processing, and that's usually what we think of when we think of therapy. Talking therapies like CBT, integrated family systems theory, therapy shadow work, social connections, finding connections with other people, talking about things basically. He also talks a lot about what he calls bottom-up processing. And it's things that attach more of your mental condition to your physical experience. He talks a lot about yoga, theater, and mindfulness, which didn't work for me extensively, but I can tell you pretty clearly that there's very much a physical connection to what I went through and PTSD that I go through, and the only way I was able to overcome some of that is through physical interventions. I'm going to talk about that later. And medicine treatment, SSRI medication, psychedelic therapies, that kind of thing. Setting events to recovery. I talked about setting events to problems. I'm going to talk about setting events to recovery for us. Institutional support. This is important. The emergency room was prepared for our family. When the girls walked in the door, they knew their names, they knew what was going on, and they were prepared. I can't tell you what a relief that was. And the girls didn't have to go in, they didn't have to wait somewhere, they didn't have to talk to somebody, so I don't know what's going on, I'm busy. They helped her. Help both the girls immensely. My room was placed essentially across the hall from Andrea's, and while I couldn't get out of bed for a while, they would wheel my bed down so I could be with her. That was a big, big relief for me.
And they kept him on the step down. He didn't need to be on the step down unit as long as he was. We kept him there, so it was easier for him to see her, and then also drop.
Yeah.
We didn't have to travel to 2 units. We could just go to the same unit. Even the people, we had to press an intercom button for them to let us in. They didn't even have us push it anymore. By the time we were there, they recognized their faces and they just buzzed us in, whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Our daughters and family were allowed near constant visitation. We're a close family, and the 4 of us being allowed to be together for the length of time that we were on a daily basis probably set us up in an incredibly positive way.
And they weren't allowing 2 people to But I think because it was literally just Ellie and I, especially for the first couple of days, they always allowed us to go in together. They were never like, we need to split off and like go see one parent at a time. They let us go see our dad and then we could go see our mom. So all of us.
Yeah. Lots of communication, tons of communication. On the ICU step down, I swear to God, I talked to 30 people a day. Doctors and residents and interns would come in and they'd say, okay, this is what's going on with Andrea, this is what's going on with you. Our family is an information-hungry family. We want to hear what's going on. It's nice if it's said in a way that we can listen to, but we'd rather have the information. Carrie was a big part of the institutional support. I can tell you exactly when that referral was made. It was probably 2 in the morning and I was crying one night and a nurse came in and gave me a funny look because she wasn't the nurse that really worried a lot about mental health stuff. And the next day you showed up. So that's where you came in. As I've said many times, and Amanda has said many times, Carrie's support is, without Carrie's support, we would not be where we are today. She helped us through the whole time. CPP schools, the pre-P and post schools were wonderful. They contacted Amanda.
I told them to stop. I mean, they were great, but, and everybody was fantastic through it, but I think, Michelle Caulfield, she had reached out and she was like, what do you need from us? And I said, tell everybody to like leave us alone for a hot second, and like when we are ready and like we need help, then like maybe send some visitors, but we don't need people knocking at the ICU saying, oh, I know your parents every day, because I was like, no, bye, like leave, like it's, because we did have people show up.
We did. Carrie, can you talk a little bit? I'm really interested in your perspective, not necessarily only about us, but really your perspective as a hospital social worker, because we were one of God knows how many people you were seeing at the time and how many people you've seen over the years. And I think that your perspective can be really useful for this type of training. So everybody, Carrie Beal.
Hi. So I had a really unique job at the hospital. I don't know how it is down here, but at Strong, there's a psychiatry hospital and there is the medicine hospital. And while they are connected, it is very siloed. So I was lucky to kind of wiggle into a role where I mainly worked in the burn trauma ICU and the step down, and then the other step down. And my sole role was to just be the emotional support for these people that were going through the absolute worst times of their lives. So, car accidents, gunshots, like freak accidents that you see on like that I shouldn't have survived show, like that is what I was working with every day. And my biggest thing, like I always had this like little pitch that I would give to people is like, you have all these people focused on the physical piece of you, we need to keep up with the emotional piece of you, because if you're progressing physically but you're not progressing emotionally, like that is ultimately going to hinder your physical progression. So I literally would just go in and I would say, unload, like, and we quickly moved past the no crying in front of everybody else. I was like, that is not something that you should be doing, and that is not something that you will continue to be capable of doing here. So I think that it was definitely a very unique situation because both of them were on the unit. Everyone, I think that, the communication, like you had discussed, was amazing, and the burn trauma ICU at Strong is absolutely amazing. So I think that that was huge. I mean, my thing every day, and especially in the beginning, was like, I don't have the perfect thing to say. Like, I'm just here to have you unload and like, let's start to kind of work through. Unfortunately, a lot of times in the medicine piece of the hospital, they're very much like, oh, someone's crying, like they need help, and there would be times where I would get people and they'd be like, oh, this woman's crying, and I'm like, okay, like, did you ask her why, and, and they'd be like, oh, no, and then, like, this one situation always sticks with me. This woman lost her husband at 65 years, 2 weeks prior, and she, like, couldn't get over it, and it's like, that's why she's crying, like, come on, and they'd be like, oh, something's going on, and I think in medicine, too, like, the big thing is to like, oh, let's medicate. And I feel very strongly about, hey, let's give, you've been there 2 days, let's not throw all sorts of medications. Like, there is a normal and appropriate reaction that people should be having. Let's not stifle it because it will come out later on at some point in a way that is just, it could have been avoided type of thing. So, and then you get the people that are like, day 3, they're like, oh, he's PTSD. And I'm like, oh, okay, like, let's, slow it down a little. So there's a lot of, education on, acute stress disorder versus PTSD. And, you were definitely exhibiting signs of that, rightfully so. But I think that a lot of it was just, you needed an outlet, and you needed the non-medical talk, and you needed to just talk about your feelings. And I was lucky enough to have that job for quite some time. So I think that was, definitely a helpful thing. I think given the amount of time that I worked with the family, I definitely started to see him improve, emotionally in some places, but there was times where there was still, a lot of work to be done and that kind of stuff. Not one human being is prepared for any sort of hospitalization like that. Most people aren't even prepared for a routine hospitalization if it's a routine surgery that you need to stay for a couple days after. No one is prepared for that type of setting. And I think that a lot of times people forgot about that. They forget. They're so focused. Doctors, they have a goal and they do it, but they also a lot of times forget, what if that was your family member? And what if this was you going through it? Put yourself, maybe not necessarily in their shoes, because that's kind of it's just kind of one-off that people say, but they don't really understand. But I think, that piece of things was important too. And just the constant communication, the advocating. I did a lot of advocating, especially down in the rehab unit where things were not going great because of things. But I think that having the support, I think that role was so significant. And like I said, I was lucky enough to do that for as long as I did. And I think that, moving forward, I don't get to see this kind of thing a lot. I do keep in touch with some patients that I have, but this is something that I've been very unexpectedly very emotional throughout this time. So it's been really cool to see, and I'm kind of glad that you showed the picture, and I know that for you that's probably very hard to see, but I think me especially, given the amount of time, and I've seen you progress and everything, but then putting it together to where it was for me it was nothing I've ever seen before, and the recovery piece, and it's just amazing. And I know that there's a lot of people supporting, but something that we were talking about earlier is that when something like this happened, everybody is what can I do? And it's you kind of have to take a step back and be the family just needs to be together and to work through this together, and they don't need the 3,200 lasagnas and all that kind of stuff. It's just too much, and the constant calls and and I had to say it to you a couple times, do not answer the phone. It is okay. You need to focus on what's going on right here. We'll figure it all out. There's people that can help in so many different ways that you don't even realize, and let's take it one step at a time. But it's a long journey. It's been a long journey, but it's been an awesome one to see and be a part of. And
Thank you.
Yeah.
Anything else you wanted to add?
I don't work there anymore. So. It sucks when I'm in situations like this, but yeah.
Thank you. Okay, let's have some fun. Let's talk about something that's not as heavy. Let's talk about recovery. We had to get through the dark stuff before we can get to the better stuff. I needed to explain how things happened, why they happened the way they did. But when I was preparing for this, I was very clear this wasn't going to be a poor me session. That's only interesting to an extent, and is nowhere near the whole story. So now we start the fun part. Okay. Andrea knows what I'm going to say. This is my friend Jeff. This is my friend Jeff Reeves. Let me tell you a little about Jeff. Okay, Jeff Went to college. I think he was a Division I swimmer. He's a friend of mine. And after college, decided to become a Navy SEAL. Jeff went into the Navy, joined the SEALs, loved it. Did SEAL stuff around the world, did all kinds of crazy stuff, eventually transitioned to a role with their exhibition parachute team. So when you're watching a football game and parachute team comes in, he was one of those guys, and he was the guy that led the group. He loved it. This was his career for the rest of his life. He had his life planned out. He had a bad landing one day, and it powdered his ankles and feet, destroyed him. And boom, the life that he had laid for himself was over. No chance of getting it back. He could heal, but he was never going to do what he planned again. And he tells the story of how he woke up in the hospital and was sitting there, not feeling good, and said to himself, okay, Jeff, you get 24 hours to feel sorry for yourself. 24 hours, and then you get to work. This is a true story, absolutely true story, real person. Everything I'm telling you about is real. Get to work. Why is he here? Isn't he beautiful? He is the most beautiful man I think I have ever met. I hate him just a little bit for that. Before I flip forward, let me tell you how Jeff reinvented his life. Because his life was over. The life that he intended was gone. Jeff has reinvented his life completely. He became an actor. He was in well over 100 episodes of soap operas. He was on 3 different soap operas, did, I want to say, 130 different episodes. He was in the first 2 Transformer movies, believe it or not. Worked in Hollywood for a long time. He is a firearms instructor, which is how Andrea and I met him. He also is literally a race car driver. He drives and promotes Aston Martin. He is a dog lover. He is an entrepreneur. He volunteers for a group called Force Blue, where these Navy guys go and swim down and replace coral. He just has had the guy's guy version of life. He has put his life back together incredibly. For the record, Jeff is not entirely benevolent. Remember, I told you I've done some training. Jeff, he was holding the rope when I rappelled off the side of the building for the first time. Remember, I'm terrified of heights. Jeff taught me advanced bleeding control. He also zip-tied, handcuffed, and duct-taped me and about 15 other guys together in a room, said nobody leaves until you're all out, and threw in a can of tear gas. That's what we do for fun.
This is what they pay for.
It was a blast. There's me rappelling. There's the top of a tear gas grenade to prove that, yes, it was actual tear gas. And there's some tear gas being released at the far right. That's not my incident. That's actually one I helped with. That was fun. That was fun. And the one second over from the right is Jeff showing wound packing with some hams that they had shot some holes in to show what happens when there's an injury. So, okay. Anyway, that's Jeff. About 5 days into the accident, I'm laying there in bed one day, and I'm feeling sorry for myself. I'm completely lost. I have no idea what to do. And I thought about Jeff, and I knew what I needed, so I contacted Jeff. And this is what he wrote to me. Daniel, I am so sorry. Is there anything I can do to help? You can't change what has happened, and I am so sorry it has. Sadly, as I had to learn, this was my new reality. Could have, should have, would have, aren't worth thinking about. Use that energy to plan the route forward. You are allowed to be pissed, mad, angry at anything and everything for a short time. Now it is time to focus and get to work. please keep me posted as to your progress and let me know if there is something I can do. I still haven't gotten out of bed. I'm on pain medicine every day, and Jeff's telling me to get to work. And that's what I needed. That's why I contacted him, because I knew he would tell me that. Some of what I'm going to talk about now is mindset, the mindset that has incrementally gotten me through the last year and a half. And Jeff comes up as an integral part of that. He's also beautiful. Andrea loves to go to trainings where he is and threatens not to do the training, but to set up a chair and just watch it. So she adores it. And he's stunning. Absolutely stunning. Okay, I had 3 intentional guiding principles in terms of mindset. First is get to work. Every day I gave myself a job to do. And that was usually something small. That was making a phone call, that was talking to a doctor, that was writing a note of some sort or another. But every day I gave myself a job. And I had a list. And I had to do that every single day, one thing every day. And it didn't matter if the rest of the day went to crap, which it often did. I just had to do that one thing every day to do my part. And that's how I took Jeff's advice. I also had an aggressively positive attitude. I'm kind of a glass half empty kind of guy in my personal life. And I've learned over the years that I have to do things to combat that. In this situation, it just felt like survival. And I had to be really aggressive about being as positive as I could be, because I knew if I let my sadness and loss and everything else overcome me, it would corrode me in short order. And that meant I couldn't allow it in myself. I couldn't allow people around me to do it. And sometimes I was able to pull it off. It was certainly harder in the beginning, but that was my goal every day, was to be as positive as I could. I wrote thank you notes constantly. I have written hundreds of thank you notes. I have a box of thank you notes. I'm going to pass this around. Everybody is to take one thank you note, one envelope, and you are to write a thank you to somebody in your life. Every one of you. I'm going to wait. Okay? You are going to do this, and you are going to mail it later. Okay? Having a sense of gratitude in the middle of all this, again, was purely survival, but it was so important for me to think about the good that was happening. I can hate the fact that we were in an accident and that we are permanently disabled all as a result. I can be really grateful that Andrea is still alive and I have my life back. I can be really angry and upset that our daughters were as traumatized as they were by this experience. I can be really grateful for the time we had together over the last couple of months, or over those couple of months when we lived in a hotel room, and when after that at the nursing home, I lived on in Amanda's apartment for 5 weeks to be closer to Andrea. So anyway, I can be grateful for a lot. I also read a book called The Daily Stoic. Every day for years, I have read a Bible reading and Daily Stoic. They sit on my dining room table. Bible reading is sometimes helpful. What is helpful every single day is the piece of Stoic philosophy that I read. At the end of this today, whenever we finish, we'll have a short raffle. If you haven't put your name over here, I need you to put your name in here. I'm giving away 3 books today. One of those is a copy of the Daily Stoic, which has absolutely, I read it for years. I read it long before the accident. Probably 5 years it has sat on my table. It has a daily reading every day. I've read it every single day for those 5 years. So, anyway, write the note while you're sitting here. Don't just take it home and throw it in the trash when you think I'm not looking. So, top-down processing. Remember we talked about top-down processing, bottom-up processing, and medication. Family. I kept my daughters close. I changed my attitude about protecting them and just
Thank God that
became humble.
happened.
That was hard.
I mean, yeah, it
That
was.
was hard. I focused on connection and information sharing. I made the girls a promise early on that they would get every bit of information that I get. I wouldn't hold anything back, good, bad, or otherwise, and they would get it before everybody else. Still do, absolutely. Friends, I kept in touch with people constantly. A lot of people that I texted constantly. Obviously Jeff was one of them. The CPP district was very supportive. Administration was very supportive on a school district level, on a personal level in my school. Rochelle Hayden's here. She is the person I work closely with every day. We spend all day, every day together. The support I got from Rochelle, and to a lesser extent, our principal, John Whaley, was incredible. Without that, I could not have gotten through it. Institutional supports, I've talked about Carrie's role. Use of shadow work, integrated family system stuff, I'm going to talk about that a little more later, and exposure therapy. Exposure therapy. I remember I used to get back up on the horse. I decided I had to do that again. I realized pretty quickly I was going to have to think about what to do with driving again. I was terrified of being in a car. Danielle especially drove me around a lot, and it was terrifying. For a long time, I was constantly saying, please slow down, I just can't take it right now. But I knew I was going to have to drive again. So one day, you were at work, and Danielle was living with me during a break. We were at the hotel in Syracuse, Rochester. And I took the keys to Danielle's car and I drove 2 blocks and came back. And then the next day I drove 4 blocks and came back. And then the next day I drove 5 blocks and came back. And I started driving again because I knew if I didn't, I might never drive again. I drive by the accident site as often as I can. And there were signs that there was an accident there for as long as a year. There were divots in the person's yard where we ended up. It was obvious something bad had happened there, but I made it a point to drive by there as often as I can. And I still do. And like getting up on the horse, it's hard the first time, and then it gets easier, and then it gets easier, and then it gets easier. I knew it would become an outsized fear in my head if I let it, so I decided to keep going. Okay. Shadow work, integrated family systems therapy. My emotions were, and to some extent still are, very unregulated and can cycle pretty quickly. I can feel things pretty intensely depending on what I'm thinking about or how I'm feeling that day or what I'm reminded of. It was also difficult for me to come to terms with strong emotions, deep sadness, deep grief about, the loss of so many things in our life, and anger, frankly. I was really bitter, still am some days, very angry and bitter. Just, some days you just want revenge, there's no way around it. And I had to come to terms with those feelings. You try to push them down for a while, but they don't go away. I found, and if we have time, I'll go through this a little more later, I found I had to make friends with those feelings. Those feelings are there for a reason. They're there to protect you. So it is better to accept them and understand them rather than try to deny them. Okay, I was going to show a video. The best teacher of integrated family systems theory is the movie Inside Out. I love the movie Inside Out.
Tomorrow.
It's all about, yes, Inside Out 2 comes out tomorrow. Inside Out, if you haven't seen it, is a movie about the interior of a child's head. She has a series of emotions: happiness, sadness, fear. What are some of the others?
Anger, disgust.
Anger and disgust, yeah. So it's fascinating. It's about how all these feelings play a role in the main character's life and how they all interact. And part of the story is they don't know why sadness is there. Happiness especially hates sadness. Or I shouldn't say hates, but tries to dismiss sadness and tries to push sadness out of the picture. And there's a very poignant scene late in the movie where sadness becomes more accepted and you sort of understand why sadness exists in somebody's life. Sadness existed in my life. I couldn't deny it. I couldn't overcome it with things that made me happy. I had to accept it. Again, I'm not going to show it, just in the interest of time. I don't want to keep you here forever. This is a wonderful scene where Sadness sits down with one of the characters and has a conversation with them. Again, I'm not going to show it. I'll encourage you to watch it. Okay, single most healing component of the last couple of months has been personal connections. Healing happens in the presence of a compassionate witness. That was said by a pastor friend of mine. Family, friends, professionals, folks like Carrie, I'll say coworkers like Rochelle and Heather, colleagues, strangers. If I have a chance, I'll talk a little later about strangers and folks who just turn up to help. It's amazing. Folks are wonderful. People are good. Bottom-up processing. Processing. I might show you this video. It's only a couple minutes long. My physical body was very compromised, and being physically active was very important to me before all of this. Who was I talking to? I think you, Audrey. How if Andrea and I hadn't been physically in the shape we were, I don't know where we'd be at this point. But being physical was good. It was something we missed. I couldn't trust my body anymore. I was in pain all the time. I couldn't do the things that I needed to do. At the time when Andrea most needed me, I couldn't get to her because my body was so compromised. So I didn't trust a lot of my body. And it was very interesting. As I became physical again and started doing workouts again, I would have these moments, oh yeah, surprise, surprise, I would start to cry. It would normally be at times like I was doing something that I didn't think I could do or doing something that really hurt. So anyway, over time I've become connected to my body again. I hire a personal trainer who I work with, and that is worth every penny. I'll do it as long as I can afford it. I'm willing to sacrifice in other areas of my life because it's that important to me. Movement is medicine. I don't think you can talk about a comprehensive treatment plan for somebody without talking about physical activity and about physically taking care of yourself. I don't think somebody heals without some work towards that. I've got a few quotes. No man has the right to be an amateur in the matter of physical training. Socrates. If you can't fly, then run. If you can't run, then walk. If you can't walk, then crawl. But whatever you do, you have to keep moving forward. By Dr. Martin Luther King. I think everybody needs to do something. I'm going to show a short video. Remember, I did mixed martial arts and grappling for a while. I friggin' loved it. It was wonderful. I especially loved the grappling part. Grappling is human chess. It looks violent. It's not terribly. It's human chess. It is at a very basic level communication, trying to figure out what the other person is doing or going to do so that you can submit them. I loved it. I'll tell you, when I was doing it, this was long before the accident, I was the most gentle that I've ever been in my life when I was going to these workouts a couple times a week. And it wasn't because I was getting out aggression. It was because it was this really, really physical and mental, I don't think connection's the right word, but interaction. So I am going to show this briefly. It's only 2 or 3 minutes long.
I think I've always been kind of a fighter, a scrapper since I was a little kid. Being youngest of 6 and getting bullied in school all the time, I was just forced to fight and forced to defend myself. I was a really bad kid in school. I was failing all my classes. I get detention all the time. I was skipping school. And detention is where I met that jiu-jitsu instructor. And he was like, look, you don't want to drop out of school. How about you try jiu-jitsu club? And I was like, okay, I'll try it. And I remember I went and I had the best time. I felt like it was the most fun I've ever had in my life. So I went from all F's to straight C's and a B. And so then I started training and I was hooked. And that's what I wanted to do. Moved to San Diego, California when I was 19 to train jiu-jitsu. That was easily the best decision I've ever made in my entire life. I feel like jiu-jitsu was such a positive influence in my life that saved me from a very dark place. I struggled with mental health my whole life and I thought about not participating in life anymore a couple times. And jiu-jitsu is the one thing that made it like, this is all worth it. When it comes to like depression or anything really, some people might see it as a weakness. That's why I try talking about it so much, especially as a man in a combat sport, because a lot of men don't want to talk about that stuff. It's very taboo. Like, oh no, I'm mentally strong, I need therapy, I'm just toughen up, man up. It's alright. And I think it's better to open about it, because so many people could use that sense of that they're not alone.
Walk to the side, push, lean. Don't do this. I see this a lot. They shove the knee and just try to land. It might work. Someone with a good guard is just gonna bring the knee right back in. So make sure that knee is all the way clear. 1, 2, 3. Thank you.
There's a lot of kids out there who are like me, who weren't the smartest, weren't the best at school, and weren't very athletic and wouldn't make any of the traditional teams. So jiu-jitsu is like that perfect place for those kids to have an outlet to make their life better. And that's what I want to do. This is my life now. This is everything I love in my life and what makes life worth living for me. My name's Adam Bradley. I'm a black belt and I train at Electrum Performance.
I can't do jujitsu anymore. I've had neck problems for years and it just exacerbated. I got my neck cranked too many times and it just hurts too much. It causes so much pain to do it anymore. But I loved it. Talk about medicine for a second. I am on an antidepressant now. I'm perfectly fine staying on it forever because it helps me. I did reduce and discontinue my use of opiates. I had a lot of pain. I still have pain, but I knew that I would have problems with opiates if I stayed on them. So I went off of them as early as I could, and I depend on over-the-counter medicine now. And that's most days, I'll be honest with you, but it works for me. I also use, I remember I was talking about sleep problems several months ago. I really got desperate. I was having ongoing problems sleeping, problems falling asleep, problems staying asleep, and it was really getting exhausting and problematic. I've tried melatonin before. I become habituated to it very, very quickly, and it's just not worth taking big doses to try to manage that. So I started taking a gummy. It's a combination of delta-9 THC, which is a legal synthetic THC. It also has CBD in it. It has something called CBN, which is, I think it's best described as THC light, and it has a small amount of melatonin in it. It is specifically for sleep. It's designed for sleep. I take about a third of one a night. It helps me fall asleep at night. I have a great story about trying a half of one night. Tried a half of one night, forgot how to take a shower. While I was in the shower, I was like, oh my God, I can't take this dose. So I don't want it to affect me during the day, so I just take a little bit at night to help me fall asleep. And most nights I can sleep past about 4 in the morning. I start waking up around 4 now. Even now I start to wake up around 4, and sometimes I'm up shortly afterwards, and sometimes I can sleep a little longer. And I'm still in therapy. I see Sandy. Sandy's stuck with me right now. I find therapy very helpful. There's just a lot to process, and I'm going to go quickly through this because there are a few things I want to do towards the end, and I'm not going to keep you late. Themes for recovery: acceptance and agency. Acceptance is not passivity. At least that wouldn't work for me. I had to accept things, and I had to be active. I had to be grateful, but I also got angry, and sometimes I can use anger effectively where I needed to. Accepting pain and embracing pain. Pain teaches you things. You have to make friends with your pain. I found I had to make friends with my pain. I had to make friends with my physical pain when I was doing my endurance events. I have to make friends with my physical pain now. I have to make friends with my emotional pain. And I can't deny it. I can't beat it down. I just have to have to learn to be a friend with it. I talked to you about the daily readings that I do. I find very helpful. Ongoing need for connection with family and friends. The stuff that I'm talking to you about today, I've probably talked about with I don't know how many other people privately. Sometimes Bill, sometimes Rochelle, sometimes and several people here. Grief and loss has been an ongoing struggle for me. Okay, let's talk about one more important thing. In 1973, let's see, Leonard Cohen, he was 39 years old when the Yom Kippur War started in Israel. It was it's sometimes called the Fourth Arab-Israeli War. Egypt and I think it was Jordan, might have been Syria, I'm not sure, attacked Israel with the intention of taking over a certain part of the Israeli land and eventually destroying the Israeli state. Leonard Cohen was living in Greece at the time with his family, and he's Jewish, or was Jewish, and said, I'm going to go to Israel. And he somehow finds himself on a transport to Israel and is sitting in a cafe one day and is recognized by some other musicians who are Israeli. And they say, hey, you're Leonard Cohen. And he says, yes, I am. And they say, okay, let's go play for the troops a little bit. So he says, okay. So in Israel, when you're fighting, you're not getting on a USO tour. You're not getting on a big plane and flying 6,000 miles. You're hopping in your car and driving to Sayre, because that's how close the war is. And that's what they did. They hopped in their car, and they drove an hour, and they were at the front lines. And they drove around to the different Israeli units. When I say they were playing for the troops, they weren't playing on a stage. There are a few photos from this time. It's literally they're sitting on boxes, and the soldiers are around them. And any soldier will tell you that war is wrong. A war can be righteous, but nobody's going to say that fighting and killing is ever the right thing. And Leonard Cohen saw some horrible things that he was conflicted about the rest of his life. Shortly afterwards, he wrote an album. I think they called the album "Who by Fire." It may have been just a song, "Who by Fire," which is a reference to a prayer that they talk about during Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur, part of it is there's a prayer where, if I'm remembering correctly, Yom Kippur is the time when God opens his book and thinks about everybody. He decides who's going to die over the next year. And he decides how they're going to die. And there's this list of who's going to die this way, who's going to die this way, and they talk about this. Who by fire is one of the lines in that, so who's going to die violently. He was never the same after that. He wrote the album Who by Fire, which some people talk about as being his best album ever. He also wrote the song Hallelujah, which a lot of people play around Christmas, which always cracks me up, because it is not a happy Christmas song at all, but people love it around Christmas. The Pentatonics version is beautiful, but have you ever looked at the lyrics? It's really dark. He started writing albums like Who by Fire and songs like Hallelujah. He started writing Hallelujah around 1980. It was released for the first time around 1984, I think, if I'm remembering correctly. I believe he wrote 180 different versions of it over time, trying to get people to accept it and print it. Eventually, it was used in the movie Shrek, and that's where most folks can remember being the first time that they heard it. I have no proof that the trauma that he saw is what caused him to be as sort of disillusioned as he was, where he could write albums like Through By Fire and songs like Hallelujah. But I can't help but think that it was a big part of it. Hallelujah is a song about broken people. It's about, for me, I think the best way I describe it it's about having faith when you no longer believe. The evidence is not showing that what you believe in is correct, that everything you believed in is just not what it is, but it's about having some sort of faith anyway. He calls it a cold and dark. Cold and dark? Cold and dark, hallelujah. I think that's what I'm spacing on it right now. Well, that happened a lot for me. I attend a Christian church now. I said I came from a Jewish and Christian family. I described, even before the accident, I described myself as barely Christian. I'm still surprised I don't get struck by lightning every time I go to church. I was raised with George Carlin, so I'm particularly irreverent and don't mind throwing that kind of things out. But, you know, this changed everything that I thought about in terms of my already sort of shaky beliefs. You go to any Christian church, you go to my Christian church, there's a lot of talk about how God loves you and He wants to provide you comfort. Well, I didn't have that in my life. God nearly killed and permanently injured the folks that I love the most in my life. How is that a compassionate God? It's one thing if you do it to me. It's another thing if you do it to the people I love. How does that make sense? God blesses those who believe and pray. Well, I'll tell you what, you know, God left me hanging. I heard no voice. I found no comfort. So I had to rethink a lot. There's a lot I no longer believe. Now, why am I willing to talk about this now? I think that's an important part of a lot of people's experience. They start questioning their faith and thinking about their faith. And I think that's natural. Remember, you have to make friends with the darkest parts of your thoughts, the darkest, you know, the hard things that'll come up for you over and over again if you don't confront them. I just decided to talk a little about them today. I don't trust God particularly anymore. I don't know that I want to, I still can't pray much. Yeah, I pray for other people, but, you know, God and I are not particularly on good terms. That said, I have faith that if there is a God, and God is good like people believe He is, or she is, that God understands that and is okay with me not being at that place. Because I'm never going to be at that place. I'm never going to be at that place. And I would like to believe that God is okay with me anyway. And if He's not, well, He wasn't able, you know, I'll find that out too. But the people you cross paths with who experience something terrible are going to be having these questions. Talking about religion and spirituality is not something we talk about a lot in the therapy field, but I think it's important because you're not advocating for a certain religion, you're not advocating for a certain set of beliefs, but you're listening to somebody else's beliefs. Even the most atheistic or agnostic person is going to have questions about karmic right and wrong, about fairness in the world, and I think it's worth thinking about those questions and exploring those questions with people. You're not influencing somebody else's beliefs, you're just paying attention to what's going on with them, because it's there, whether we're bringing it up or not. So, okay, and I've talked about this, I spent a lot of time thinking about my feelings. Recovery takes time. My recovery emphasized a sense of personal agency, and my recovery focuses on process. I'm baby steps, I'm turns into miles. If Carrie ever said to me, you know, you have to start, you have to learn to be okay with this. You have to start, you have to do this to start getting better. I'll take it from Jeff, but I'm not going to take it from anybody else. Carrie just listened to me, and that was everything I needed at the time. If you're walking through hell, keep walking. So general takeaways: trauma is common, affects body and mind, it's always the result of many factors, known and unknown, whether you know them or not. It affects multiple areas of someone's life, it affects people deeply. sometimes requiring people to struggle with conflicting emotions and deep questions. I've given you a picture into some of mine. Let's see, long-term process, have different needs, blah, blah, blah. Recovery is multifaceted. What I found most helpful, I'm gonna go through this quick. Constant communication, showing care and appreciation for me and my family. Carrie took care, not just of me, but of our girls, and Andrea, and did that long term. Caring about my family meant everything to me. What I found most helpful for mental health providers, being friendly and caring, providing a sense that they cared about me and my family, listening and being with me, not trying to rush my recovery. For my employer, immediate contact and strong expressions of support, care and support for Andrea and the girls, help with logistics, help with communication. I depended on administration to help put notes out to my coworkers, and later a lot of understanding when I returned to work. Rochelle was a big help when I returned to work. I'd have flashbacks at work. It was terrible. I would have times where I just couldn't function, and most of those times I would tell Rochelle, I just need a couple minutes. This is what's going on. She was a big support for me. John was a big support for me. Over time, my flashbacks got better. I probably had them for 14, 15 months. They got really bad around the year anniversary. I had about a 6-week period that was awful again. It was back to where it was in the beginning. It was around the time you had your reconstructive surgery, and it was about the year anniversary. Anyway, Rochelle was a big support during that time. Okay. Implications, even providers who play a limited role can assist a client in mitigating their symptoms. Providers play a long-term role will be most effective by encouraging connection and empathy. Okay. Addendum, professionals and caregivers also need support. This explains vicarious trauma as well. Traumas are not big, they're often, well, sometimes they're big, oftentimes they're little and they compound and they stack on top of each other, and I think that happens to therapists much more than we talk about. It's exhausting, it's painful to be in a helping profession. So, okay, let's do a discussion before I do the epilogue. I have a short epilogue when this is over, but let's do a quick discussion. Thank you for walking through this with me, and thank you for allowing me to go through this slowly and quickly at the same time. I hope you found this helpful. Any questions before we go into the discussion? I'm sure you all are like, you talked entirely too much. I got way more than I wanted out of this. I just want to take a break from this. This is heavy. What is something valuable about today? What is something you found helpful? And I am looking for an answer.
Your authenticity, willingness, the intimacy.
Thank you.
It's not often that you get therapists to become as vulnerable as you were willing to go with everybody and to share your experiences, especially as it relates to mental health, because I think a lot of times therapists want to, portray that we've got it together. We aren't affected by these things. And it's just, I think it helps all of us grow with what we do by watching your example to be able to say that. So thanks.
I think getting those different perspectives were helpful. As therapists, we typically see one person and their perspective of different perspectives, not like the different perspectives of different actual people that were in the same situation. It was super valuable.
I'm glad. We're very lucky today. Amanda was able to come down, Carrie was able to come down. I was almost able to get a comment from the trauma surgeon who put Andrea back together. She ended up being too busy and she obviously couldn't come down, but I had asked her to do a quick 5-minute video. She just has too much going on, because this is what she does all day, every day, is respond to traumas.
I thought it was great how you also talked about, even though they might have not been your forefront thoughts at the moment, but how much your past experience, just that reminder of how it's not just that moment in time, like you say, the actual, however long that accident was, it was all these other experiences, and it's just that reminder to think about that when you're working with people and all those layers of everything. So I found that, that really set with me.
Good, I'm glad.
To focus on.
I'm glad. also wanted to talk in the same way, to talk about how recovery is the same way.
Right.
There
Yeah,
are
it was really
pieces,
good to
you know.
hear it. Yeah. I think that's great.
Good, I'm glad. How can you apply this today to your role?
I've been sober myself for 38 years, and I have been in the field for 35. And every time I go to a training, I find another piece of something that I know will be helpful to me. And I value that I have that investment. And today's was, I'm doing good. I've got some good ideas, and respecting people where they are has probably been one of the most important additions to the toolbox that I found, instead of trying to make them go somewhere, or all for good intention, it's gonna be a tragic accident.
I think we have a tendency to wanna fix people.
Yeah.
And it makes sense, you wanna, as you said, push somebody a little faster than they may be comfortable going.
Or the systems around us kind of force us into those positions as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely, for
Right,
sure.
being in it as long as I have, that was the way we did it early on, hot seat therapy.
Yeah.
And just being willing to learn, and so I'll go back and there'll be something that you will have said, or somebody else will have said, that will show itself. in the next couple.
Last question, how will you help knowing you may be a small but important part of somebody's recovery? I'll wait.
I think it can be important to think about the idea of like planting seeds as opposed to thinking that something that you do is going to have this immediate large effect that you might be able to see. It might be something like now people who supported you in the process or your family hear about different ways that support helped down the line. We don't always get that opportunity. But knowing those like trickle effects and being reminded of them, I think, are important.
Thank you.
Just listen.
You're on a ride with somebody else, and that's really what it is, it's a ride. You're there as an observer. We've had to learn that, definitely.
But I think as a therapist, just being patient and like knowing that, having in your mind that you've planted seeds, just being patient to wait what they'll bring forth.
If you would have told us we'd be where we are 18 months ago, I wouldn't believe you.
Right.
But by taking it one slow step at a time and understanding that it is a slow process, we've gotten where we are. Baby steps turn to mamas.
How long did it take you guys to feel like you were making some progress? Because I think oftentimes you're making progress, but you don't feel like you're making progress because you look so far down the line. And I think sometimes that's where people want to give up, like, I'm not making it, they can't see it. And I think sometimes, like, I try to, with the kids, I work with the kids, elementary kids, and I try to keep showing them so much progress they made, because they can't see it. Did you guys see it? Like, is that helpful? I think to show you made, even the minor, the small gains are huge.
I think,
I don't think that I've always seen them.
no, you haven't.
No.
A lot of them either do that. To be honest, I think like it took them a lot of time to, sorry, I'm speaking for you, but to see their progress, because Ellie and I saw it every day. We saw a little bit of progress with Dad in his recovery, and a little bit of progress with Mom every day. And we got to see those little steps, and we told them about that, but they were like, that's not a huge deal. So I think it, like, I don't think anybody looks at their progress and sees how they're progressing. I think it has to come from somebody else, like just constantly telling you, because
Well,
otherwise.
when you're in the dirt, you can't see past the dirt, but when you're watching, I'm constantly reminding Andrew, wow, look at this, you didn't do this yesterday, you did today. And like you said, it has to be constant, because we are constantly our own worst critic. So no, we're not doing great. Well, yeah, you are.
But do you hear it? Does it feel good? Does it do anything? Do you hear it from other people?
Oh, yeah, and always does have to hear it. It always does good to hear it, whether it looks like it or not.
Whether you believe it or not.
Yeah, yeah, people can't help but listen, we can't not listen. And I've always kept that in mind with my clients. If I can say something nice, and they might not believe it, but they can't not listen to it. And if I say it enough times, it'll sink in at least a little bit. Okay. Last question. Now that you're thinking more about vicarious trauma, how will you better take care of yourself? How will you care for colleagues? And who takes care of you?
I have a great support system. I've built that over the years. I followed a lot of the recommendations that were given to me when I got sober. And they have paid off beyond my wildest dreams. So, my husband's amazing. Really loves him. Great. And I'm a supervisor, so I try to feel the pulse of what's going on and talk to people about it, not ignore it. When I'm afraid that I can't do it, I talk to my supervisor about it. So, those are some of the ways I do it.
It's a real question, there's lots of you here.
My job is to kind of help support staff and agency that I work with, and help guard against vicarious trauma from the work that they're doing. So for me, stepping into that was a shift. I worked with kids before that, so the who takes care of you part has been my role to like provide that as a service, and somewhere along the way I realized, oh, that's right, like I have to go elsewhere for that service, and to make sure that I am constantly doing that to kind of protect against that for myself. Is part of like where I am in my thought process with that.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I think I said earlier, Amanda and Danielle bugged me for months to get into therapy because I was struggling. And it's one thing to be an idiot and not take care of yourself. It's another thing to be upsetting your family. And
You weren't upsetting us.
I wasn't willing to have you distracted by my needs that I wasn't taking care of, if that makes sense. It's my job to take care of my needs. And if you're bugging me, that's taking up space in your head. So I've got to free you up from that. So I went to therapy.
Well, and
Went back to therapy.
I think too, I can add a little piece to this. You tried it a little early on.
Yes, I
and
did.
you were like, nope, this isn't for me. So, I mean, it's not, first time around, if it's not someone that you're not feeling connected with and you're not feeling like it's helpful, like, don't keep going with it, like, that's not helpful either, you know, but you've found someone else that's been helpful and you're sticking with it now and you're having a completely different experience than you did the first time, so that's also important.
Unfortunately, Sandy had to leave, and she told me she was gonna have to. Sandy Follett, who I see now, runs the grief center in the Southern Tier. She had to run to a funeral to support a family. But she's just invaluable. She's so kind and so patient, and that's what I needed. Okay. Epilogue. When we were having the worst moments of our lives, a lot of people who owed us nothing showed up anyway. And I'll spend the rest of my life remembering this and trying to give back a portion of what was given to us. People came out of the woodwork for us. Strangers came out of the woodwork for us. I have 3 boxes at home of the cards we received from friends and family and strangers. I kept all of them from kids that I'd known. The strangers that came out of the woodwork to help us. People who I didn't know would send cards. I received 3 cards in one day from the same person that I didn't know. They were just dropping a card, and several in the mail a week to us. I remember all of that. People helped us. I talked a little about religion. People who helped us who were young, people helped us who were old, people helped us whose job it was, people helped us who owed us absolutely nothing. We were helped by people who were Christian, we were helped by people who were Jewish, we were helped by people who were Muslim, we were helped by people who were Hindu, we were helped by people who were Buddhist and Shinto. I think I was helped by some somebody who was quite possibly a Rastafarian. He was fascinating. He was an Uber driver. I think he was probably high at the time because he pulled over because we're on our way. I'm going 1.5 miles to the hospital, and he goes, "I need to get something to eat, Mom. You don't mind, do you?" And he pulls over the car and runs into a restaurant and spends 5 or 10 minutes getting something to eat. I'm like, well, I'm just an a-hole in a wheelchair. So I had to wait for him to come back. I've got 100 stories like that. It was great. Andrea and I were especially appreciative and inspired by the care we received. On the ICU where I was, Jen Taylor's daughter worked there. Yeah, we were, and the team on Kessler Burn Trauma ICU. I started thinking about this the first couple of days. They were just so phenomenal. Andrea and I wanted something good to come out of our experience, so we started a scholarship fund for folks going into healthcare, and it was partially funded by the owners of the trucking company. The owners of the truck. It's not the driver, but the owners of the company. Andrew and I actually met them last week for the first time, and while that was emotionally complicated, it was the right thing to do. They were good people. You know, they never wanted this. They were upset about it too, and they funded the scholarship as well. So we did the scholarship together, and that's them. With our first recipient, Amelia Sparling, in the center. She actually happens to be one of my former students. She's studying nursing at Hardwick. We have nothing to do ethically with the process of choosing who handles it, who is chosen. And I found out she was applying. I purposely didn't tell the community foundation that she was applying because I didn't want to hurt her chances. I didn't want them to say, well, Dan called me, and now I can't give it to her if I want to, because that's not ethically okay. So I kept it to myself, and they ended up choosing her. Amelia and I also share a birthday, and have had many times would have birthday cake in my office when she was young. Life moves on, and that's us. And that's the end. So thank you. One thing before you leave, I have a few things I'm giving away. Did everybody do their thank you note? Anybody that didn't? Did anybody not do it? I will track you down. I will haunt you. Okay, I have 3 books to give away.